Chapter 750. Shit, what's boss's move? Directly attacking her chest? I've never seen him make such a sinister move before. The voices around the training ground couldn't be heard by the two of them. Feng Ling's chest was heavily padded. She paused and couldn't help but step back several steps, but her expression didn't change at all and she continued to fight back. After all, she hadn't received any strict and precise training. All her moves were based on instinct and some punches and kicks she learned from the mafia. She was fast, but in the face of Nan Heng's very routine and occasionally changing fighting style, although she could withstand 3 or 4 moves, his moves became faster and faster, and then he hit her chest again and again. Although Feng Ling knew it, she still felt a little uneasy after being attacked. For a moment she had to stagger back several steps. When she steadied herself, Nan Heng looked at her with a much colder expression. It wasn't her. Although they looked similar, most of them were about the same height at the age of 13 or 14. After confirming that the boy in front of him was not the fearless girl in the orphanage a month ago, Nan Heng no longer probed but used all his strength and didn't treat her as a newcomer at all. Feng Ling knew what he meant. After being hit a few times, she became smart and only defended. After all, her speed was still fast. If she kept dodging, Nan Heng could only hit her shoulder in 10 moves, but if she wanted to hurt Nan Heng with a counterattack, she might have to train for at least another 10 years. It was just a test and it could be counted as half of the competition. Feng Ling knew what real strength was. She calmed herself down and accepted the challenge. In the end, Nan Heng's fist almost landed on her face. Just as she was about to take the blow, a gust of cold wind swept past her eyes, and the man's hand stopped precisely an inch away from her face. She raised her eyes to look at him, and Nan Heng also glanced at her coldly without expression. Obviously he was a little disappointed with her skills, but at least compared with other newcomers, Feng Ling was much stronger. Nan Heng withdrew his hand, turned around and left without saying a word. The group of people who were carried down were about to clap and cheer for this exciting fight, but they were also afraid that their boss would sweep through them in a fit of rage. If that happened, they would all suffer a calamity. They resisted the urge to applaud, but when they saw their boss turn around and leave, the group of people stood on the spot, confused. They didn't know what their boss was planning. Was he going to keep this guy or not? Feng Ling stood on the training ground and raised her hand to press the slightly painful part of her chest. The reason it hurt was because Nan Heng had hit her chest several times. Others might not have seen it, but she clearly knew that he was testing whether she was a woman or not. Fortunately, the breast wrapping cloth he was using now was stronger and thicker. She was only 13 years old. Even if her breasts were well developed, they were not fully developed yet. Being tightly wrapped by the breast wrapping cloth, he basically couldn't feel anything when he patted her. Compared with what he saw with his new eyes in the sauna room that day, it was certainly not the feeling he had imagined. Just this point alone was enough to dispel half of his suspicions about her. Boss. A man who was not afraid of death was too curious. He chased after Nan Heng and asked, "That guy named Feng Ling, are we going to keep him or not? I think he is very arrogant at such a young age. Why don't we just keep him and let him hone himself in our base? I think in a few years his edges and corners will be smoothed out." Li Nanheng didn't look back and said indifferently, "Since you like to hone yourself so much, let him stay. Throw him to the drill master of your Team 3 and let him hone himself." Throw him to their Team 3? That was to say, if that boy entered the training camp of their Team 3 in the future, the drill master would often ask Feng Ling to stand out and compete with them? Wasn't this just asking for trouble? That Feng Ling was just defeated by Boss Li. If it were all the newcomers in this base, who could be his opponent? Ahem, boss. The man followed up reluctantly and asked in a gossipy tone, "Why did you keep hitting that boy's chest? Could it be?" In the past, they often heard that Boss Li was not close to women. Even if the Li family arranged beautiful girls for him, he didn't even bother to look at them. Some people even suspected that Boss Li's sexual orientation was abnormal and feared that he would lose his virginity in the base. Later they found that they thought too much. Boss Li was probably not interested in men or women because he really didn't want to be close to anyone. Nanheng glanced at him coldly and slowly said, "I'm not interested in men. If you say one more word, I'll run 50 laps around the base tomorrow." The man behind him instantly turned pale and ran away as if his feet were smeared with oil. The next day in the breakfast cafeteria of 11 base, Nanheng, who rarely came to the base cafeteria to eat, rarely appeared in everyone's sight. However, the group of rookies and semi-rookies who had personally watched the exciting match last night still had shock in their eyes that they had not digested after the whole night. Someone still whispered, "Hey, do you think Boss really likes men? Last night, Boss really hit that kid's chest directly." It's obvious that he was taking advantage of him. Even if the whispers of the group of people were too low, Nanheng could still hear them. A drill master sitting opposite him didn't dare to say a word but still glanced at him. Nanheng didn't respond. After eating, he threw the tableware heavily on the table and snorted coldly. Then he said coldly to the drill master of Team 3 sitting opposite him, "Kick the boy named Feng Ling who was assigned to your team last night out of your team." The drill master of Team 3? He was just assigned to his team last night, and it had been less than 10 hours since then. How could he kick him out? Then he heard the expressionless Boss Lee said coldly, "Send him to my team. I'll deal with him myself." The drill master of Team 3 and the other drill masters, Feng Ling was taken to the base cafeteria by K early in the morning. Although 11 Base was a training ground, it occupied a very large area. Even the so-called base cafeteria was larger than the general restaurants outside, and the dining facilities were also very good. Feng Ling had never experienced such treatment. As soon as she walked in with K, she saw Nanheng coming out with an unkind look. However, even though she saw him, Feng Ling was still hesitating whether she should greet Boss, but Boss Lee just coldly passed her by. Chapter 751. When Feng Ling learned that she was suddenly transferred from Team 3 to Team 1 and that the drill master of Team 1 was Li Nanheng himself, she remained expressionless. Kay said that those who could enter Team 1 were all rookies with excellent martial arts skills. Ordinary rookies couldn't enter Team 1 at all. Usually, whenever there was a mission, Team 1 would be the first to be selected because Team 1 was the most skilled group in the entire base and was the most admired training camp in the base. Because most of the members of Team 1 had grown up, even without Boss Lee's personal supervision, the members of Team 1 would train consciously every day and Boss Lee didn't need to worry about them at all. Many people in 11 Base had different opinions about Feng Ling's sudden transfer to Team 1. Some people thought that Feng Ling was lucky to be discovered by Boss with her little martial arts skills. She was able to sneak into Team 1 as soon as she entered the base and get such a good opportunity, while some people thought that Boss was clearly making things difficult for her. The members of Team 1 were all like wolves and tigers. When they trained, they all worked hard. When they went out on missions, they dared to put their lives on the line. If such a 13-year-old boy was brought into Team 1, he would probably die in the training camp within half a month. However, in the face of all kinds of curiosity, comments, and concerns from this group of new people, Feng Ling didn't think much of it. Since she had decided to settle down in 11 Base, it didn't matter where she lived. Anyway, as long as she could train, learn marksmanship, and all kinds of things she liked, as long as she had a place to live and food to eat, this was the life she wanted. On the first night after being transferred to Team 1, Feng Ling didn't have the consciousness to live there directly and still slept in the lower bunk of Kay's room. Kay gave her an old cell phone that he had used before and said that in the future, as long as she had a chance to go on a mission in Team 1, she would get a lot of bonuses if she succeeded, so she didn't have to worry about buying new things. If it was a special big mission that might require her to risk her life, as long as she could complete the mission and come back alive, the bonus was enough for her to buy a small house in the suburbs of Los Angeles. It could be seen that although the members of 11 Base only wore ordinary uniforms, they were actually very rich and powerful. That night, Feng Ling fell asleep at Kay's place. It was rare for Nanheng to take a look at the training camp at night. The members of Team 1 were surprised that their boss actually had the time to come today. Usually they trained by themselves or the deputy drill master would do it for them. Their boss was always elusive, only appearing during the assessment, but tonight he actually showed up. In the training camp, the man flickered the cigarette between his fingers. He glanced at the familiar faces in the crowd and glanced at the person in charge of the training camp. He asked if the newcomer had come today, but the answer he got was that the newcomer would come tomorrow morning and would not come tonight. Nanheng threw the cigarette butt onto the ground and stepped on it to extinguish it. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the people in the field, his gaze turning cold inch by inch. He was transferred to Team 1, an honor that all the members of the base dreamed of, but he didn't come in time? And he said he would come back tomorrow? Very good. It was probably because he was too good-tempered. It was rare for him to find a newcomer who could catch his eye, so he wanted to promote him. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being impolite. The next day. Why does Boss's face look worse today? Last night, the light in Boss's room seemed to be on. Did he not sleep last night? How could it be? Did Boss suffer from insomnia? Of course he suffered from insomnia. Nanheng felt that it was probably because he had been with this group of men in the base for too long that he was particularly sensitive to women. He had just seen them in the sauna room of the orphanage that night half a year ago, and they were a pair of little buns that had just developed. It was obviously a teenage girl who had broken in, but he still couldn't stop thinking about them. He didn't know whether it was because of the pair of little white buns that loomed beside the clothes that he had seen, or because he couldn't forget the guy who dared to burn the wires in the bushes, spend the night in the jungle, and dare to provoke him with signals. However, as soon as he closed his eyes and fell asleep at night, the scene he saw in the sauna room when he tore off the other party's sleeves jumped out in his mind. The key was that in the dream, the other party's face suddenly turned into Feng Ling's emotionless face from time to time. They looked quite compatible, both with the same soft and tender skin. It was because of this strange dream that their heads and bodies were put together that Nanheng suddenly woke up and couldn't sleep all night. It was not until dawn that he barely slept for an hour. When he woke up in the morning, his face was as bad as if a can of Swedish herring had been splashed on his face, which was unbearable to look at. Nanheng walked out of the training camp, wearing a tight-fitting black t-shirt under his black combat uniform. His neat short hair made him look arrogant and lazy in this casual and sleepy state. He was so cold and cool that it instantly silenced all the discussions around him, not daring to make any more rash comments. "Boss, you didn't sleep well last night, did you?" Han Jin, the deputy drill master of Team 1, followed behind and asked. Nanheng didn't answer him but glanced coldly at the members of the training camp behind him, lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth, narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Is that boy here?" "You mean Feng Ling? He arrived an hour ago and said he would arrive this morning. As expected, he was on time. In the morning when we were just preparing for training, he came in. He just ran a few laps with everyone and is now learning to do other training in the back," Han Jin answered truthfully. He was a man of his word. But damn, why did he dream of that brat in the middle of the night? Li Nanheng's face darkened. Although that boy named Feng Ling is young, he is a newcomer after all. I think his moves are ruthless and fast. Give him intensive training. If he can't keep up, let him practice overnight. If his movements are not up to standard, beat him with a stick. Don't consider whether he is a newcomer or not. Han Jin stood behind and thought for a while, saying silently, "It can be seen that he hasn't received professional training, but he is very quick-witted. With a little guidance he can do very standard movements. He has only been here for an hour, but he has learned several good movements with good strength. I don't think we should use a stick to beat him for the time being." Nanheng, with a cigarette in his mouth, suddenly turned to look at Han Jin, expressionless. As soon as he saw the fiery look in Boss's eyes, Han Jin instantly understood. "Okay, I see. Give him the most intensive training. If he can't keep up, use a stick. If he doesn't cry for his mom and dad, you can revoke my title of deputy drill master at any time." Chapter 752. In the afternoon, Nanheng inspected the training of several teams and was about to go to Team 1, but he paused and looked down at his clothes. There were several good newcomers in other training camps who were splashed with some muddy water, but it had already dried up and was not obvious. Usually, everyone in the base was a man, and no one would be so clean that they would even care about this bit of muddy water. Even Nanheng, who was a little obsessed with cleanliness, was gradually assimilated by this group of careless people. "Boss, there is only one team left in today's inspection. Aren't we going?" Xiao Su, who was following behind, was about to finish his service and would soon be assigned to work in the Los Angeles Police Department. He was agile and had always been valued by Nanheng. He had been in the base for some years and did everything neatly. In the months before he was about to leave in order to practice his ability, he often followed Nanheng. Nanheng didn't answer but coldly glanced at his clothes again. Instead of going directly to the training camp of Team 1, he turned back to his residence. "Go get me a set of clothes. I'll go after I change." Xiao Su was a little stunned and didn't know how to react. No matter how much Boss liked to be clean, he wouldn't suddenly change clothes after walking around several training camps. What was going on? However, Xiao Su was a straightforward person. He didn't ask any superfluous questions and directly went to bring Nanheng's custom-made black combat uniform into his room. Nanheng went back and took a simple shower. The tiredness from not sleeping well last night had been washed away. He casually combed his neat short black hair, took the clothes that Xiao Su handed over, glanced at them and put them on. Xiao Su knew that Boss usually didn't like to wear suits. Instead, he liked to wear the same black uniform as everyone else. Other slightly more formal clothes would only be worn when leaving the base or returning to the Li family, but Boss Li would never be too stiff. Even if it was a suit worth millions of yuan, he could still look like a military ruffian. And this black uniform, even if it was the same clothes, standing in the crowd, the cold and cool man was an unforgettable scenery. This was said by Xiao Su's sister when she came here to visit 2 years ago. His sister accidentally saw Boss and began to miss him in her heart. Her mouth was full of all kinds of admiration for Boss Lee, and she couldn't suppress it even if she wanted to. The man buttoned up the buttons on his uniform one by one and said coldly, "Go to Team 1. Xiao Su paused for a moment. He remembered that Boss had purposely taken a bath and changed his clothes so that he could join Team 1 later. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. At the same time, the daily routine special training of Team 1, which began early in the morning, was almost over. Feng Ling was a newcomer and the youngest. She was not as tall as the men in the team who were already 1.8 or 1.9 meters tall, so she was arranged to be in the first row. Originally, many members of Team 1 were not too happy with this rookie who was too young. This was because no rookie had ever directly entered Team 1. They had to go through strict screening and competition before they could enter. They could be kicked to another team at any time to be retrained, but this kid had entered Team 1 as soon as he arrived. However, in this half a day of training, Feng Ling learned every training and competition very quickly as long as he watched how others did it. A series of training tasks and movements were very standard. Even if he was not familiar with it the first time, he would be surprised when he did it the second time. It could be said that no one could find any fault with him. As a result, in these few hours, the unwillingness in most people's hearts gradually diminished. Besides, Feng Ling was young, thin, and didn't have a cheeky smile that was annoying. Most importantly, he was also good-looking. His soft and tender skin made people inexplicably want to protect him. In addition, he wasn't the kind of trash who was too weak to stay in Team 1. In just a few hours, he had gradually been accepted by the members of Team 1, and they had no intention of excluding him at all. This really put Deputy Drill Master Han Jin in a difficult position. On the one hand, he had been trying to catch Feng Ling's weakness and punish him. Otherwise, he couldn't explain to Boss Lee, but this boy didn't make any mistakes at all. In front of so many members, he had to be clear about the reward and punishment, so he was very anxious. After a few hours, Feng Ling was accepted by everyone, but he was so angry that he got a big pimple on his chin. The day's training was almost over. At this time, most of the members were very excited and had planned their schedule in the base in the afternoon. Feng Ling was no exception. As soon as she entered the base, she changed her residence twice within 2 days. She also needed to make a good arrangement for her new residence in Team 1. The deputy drill master hadn't told her where she lived, so she had to interrogate him after a while. At the same time, at the passageway outside the training camp, a tall man in a black uniform strolled over. His cold and cool face was calm and indifferent. He stood at the entrance of the training camp like a ferocious tiger, looking at the group of members who were training. The man just stood there quietly, but his aura was enough to frighten people. The members who were a little slack because the training was coming to an end immediately stood as straight as a tree, and their expressions were very serious. But even so, Feng Ling was still not affected at all. She maintained the same action and expression from the beginning without any neglect, which was why the deputy drill master couldn't find any fault with her. This little boy was really too serious. 2 people behind Feng Ling moved their mouths slightly and whispered, "Boss Lee usually doesn't see him even once in half a month. What's wrong with him today? He comes quite frequently. Is there any important task that he needs to tell us in advance?" It's possible. Otherwise, boss usually doesn't come here. No matter how these people were curious and talking in their hearts, Li Nanheng still stood at the entrance of the training camp, looking calmly at them who were in the training ground. The man was tall and had long legs, a high-nose bridge and a cold and handsome face. If it weren't for the fact that his expression was so cold and indifferent, he could be described as a famous painting from ancient times. Xiao Su, who followed behind Li Nanheng, couldn't help glancing at the group of people and then at the relatively thin Feng Ling standing in the first row of the team. He thought that no matter how much Boss cherished talents and took special care of members with potential, this Feng Ling shouldn't be so amazing that Boss could change so inexplicably today. He was probably just thinking too much. Chapter 753. Li Nanheng looked at them until the training was over and the team members were dismissed. The man's dark eyes swept across the crowd and finally fixed on Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't seem to see him and went straight to Han Jin. "Deputy Drill Master, where should I live in the future?" Han Jin paused, hesitated, and remembered that the base members of Team 1 usually lived in the buildings behind. He was about to make a phone call to ask which room had a bed when he suddenly caught a glimpse of Li Nanheng coming over. "Boss." Han Jin quickly turned to look at Li Nanheng. Nanheng didn't respond, but when he approached, he tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He put his hand casually in his trouser pocket and held the cigarette in his mouth. The smoke lingered in front of his cold face, and his neat black hair was a little messy due to the wind, which added a bit of wildness to him. His handsome profile was like that of the ancient Roman god of war in the oil paintings of ancient times. Seeing this, Han Jin and Xiao Su standing aside couldn't help secretly exclaiming that Boss Lee was really AF * king seductive man. Fortunately, there were no women in this base, and even the cooks in the base cafeteria were all men. Otherwise, Boss Lee would have been eaten by women sooner or later. Deputy Drill Master, what's the matter? Nanheng asked, obviously asking Feng Ling. Feng Ling just replied indifferently, well, I have something to do. Then she continued to ask Han Jin, where do I live? Nanheng, who was completely ignored, quietly took the cigarette from his lips and glanced at him coldly. The young man was wearing a new black combat uniform. His androgynous face seemed to be glowing because of this suitable equipment, and he looked even more handsome. Especially when the shadow of his ink-black hair fell on his eyes, it seemed to have a faint light that made one's imagination run wild. Realizing that he was so fascinated by this 13-year-old brat, Nanheng narrowed his eyes again, looked away, and glanced at the buildings not far away. Han Jin arranged a single room for him. He is young and looks much thinner than many members. If he lives in the dormitory, he will probably be eaten alive by those little brothers in a few days. Let him live alone and let him adapt to life in the base for a while. Hearing this, Feng Ling turned to look at Nanheng seriously. Thank you, boss. It was relatively convenient for her to live alone. Whether it was taking a bath or wrapping her chest every day, she could have her own space. She didn't need to avoid others, and she didn't need to be too careful to cover herself. Nanheng didn't respond. He flicked the cigarette but with his slender fingers, glanced at her clothes and black boots and said coldly, 13 years old. You're not tall. After 5 years in the base, you probably won't even reach 7 meters. You're the first dwarf in 11 base so far. If it weren't for your speed and agility, I'm afraid you wouldn't be qualified to stand here. Hearing his words, Feng Ling couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. So in Boss Lee's eyes, whether a person is good or not depends on their height. Nanheng finally looked at her coldly, and there was a slight chill in his eyes. You're so small. What other advantages do you have except for your speed? If a strong man of 200 or 300 kilograms were to fight with you, I'm afraid you wouldn't even be able to withstand a shoulder throw. Speed and ruthlessness are just forms, and physical endurance is the most basic. You don't even have the basic physical fitness, and you want to establish a foothold in 11 base? I'm afraid you think too highly of yourself. Physical fitness. This was indeed Feng Ling's weakest point so far. Compared with girls, she was strong and powerful, but compared with boys of the same age, she was indeed much weaker. The basic gap between men and women was in strength and physical fitness. I'm just young. In 3 or 5 years, boss, just wait and see. Feng Ling smiled, but the smile in her eyes was obviously just an expression to express her desire to stay and didn't really reach her heart. Nanheng looked at her indifferently and repeated indifferently, in 3 or 5 years, can you be 7 meters tall? Even if I'm not 7 meters tall, I can definitely lift you up, Boss Lee. She leaned forward slightly and approached Nanheng. Her starry eyes met his and she smiled. Or, in 3 to 5 years, Boss Lee, are you afraid that I'll throw you over my shoulder and lose face? Nanheng's eyes were as bright as the stars in the night sky. She looked at him and smiled. Or, in 3 to 5 years, Boss Lee is afraid that I'll throw you over my shoulder and lose face? Nanheng was expressionless. He looked at the boy's white and delicate skin, which was clearer than a woman's, watched the boy's face approach so wantonly, and breathed in the faint smell of bath milk on the boy's body, which inexplicably revealed a hint of sweetness in the fragrance. There was even a touch of powder on the boy's slightly curved lips. His thin lips, which had never been applied with any skincare products or cosmetics, had a natural clean color, and seemed to be silently seductive. Facing a mere 13-year-old boy, Nanheng's clothes were cold and shabby, but his eyes glanced at Feng Ling's chest. Her chest was flat, and her figure looked stronger than he had imagined. She was completely different from the one in the sauna room. Damn it. It was okay for him to dream at night. Facing a teenage brat in broad daylight, he actually had the *king desire to strip him naked and have a good look at him. In his heart, he was already suspecting whether it was really because he lacked women that he was inexplicably attracted to a child with soft skin and tender flesh. On the surface, Nanheng was noble and indifferent, without the slightest extra expression. Only a trace of a smile appeared in his eyes, but it was a smile so cold that it was hard to see through. His black eyes were filled with warning. Want to throw me? Then I'm afraid you'll have to train hard 24 hours a day in the next 3 or 5 years. Don't slack off at all. Otherwise, if you can't even lift a finger of mine, I'm afraid you'll be laughed at by the brothers in the base for many years. Feng Ling noticed that he glanced at her chest. Her expression did not change. It was as though she had inadvertently patted her chest, as though she was casually patting the dust. However, as she continued to pat her chest, it allowed him to clearly see the flat expanse of her chest. She looked at Nan Heng's calm and indifferent eyes without the slightest fear. Then we'll see when the time comes. Her physical fitness was not up to standard now, but it didn't mean that she couldn't do it in the future. It was only interesting when there was a challenge. Feng Ling originally just wanted to find a suitable place for herself to survive. It was enough as long as she had food and shelter. Today she suddenly had something she really wanted to do. For example, one day in the future she would give Li Nanheng a shoulder throw and let him fall hard at her feet. Chapter 754. A month after Feng Ling officially joined 11 Base. Recently, Li Nanheng had been annoyed by a bunch of trivial matters of the Li family. After the men of the Li family turned 20, they would inevitably be taken away by their families to be married. He had struggled for half a year, but he was still disturbed by the young ladies of the aristocratic families arranged by his family. Apart from turning off his phone reasonably in the base and cutting off all contacts with the outside world as long as he stepped out of the gate of the base, he would definitely be entangled by all kinds of things arranged by his family and all kinds of women. After another month in the base, he also turned off his private phone for a month, and the elders of the Li family directly came to him. At the same time, Nanheng was watching the members of Team 1 practice shooting in the training ground behind. A group of team members stood in a standard horizontal row, and 5 people came forward to take guns. Nanheng leaned against a stone table not far away, playing with a gun in his hand, and looked indifferently at those people who were not familiar with shooting skills. After all, most of the people receiving training now were newbies. Among 100 people there were at least 20 good shooters, but for Nanheng it was still not enough. When Feng Ling and the others came forward together and picked up the gun, her movements were standard and neat. When the others were still adjusting their positions, Feng Ling had fired a shot forward without hesitation. With a bang, she hit the bullseye. Feng Ling had only been in the base for a month. During this month, Feng Ling did well in everything, but she should have just touched the shooting training, but her shooting skills were obviously not the skills of a newbie. Kay once said that Feng Ling's shooting skills were very good. When she saved Kay, she used his gun. Nanheng watched from a distance. The man in the black combat uniform looked cold and noble, leaning there without moving, completely like a boss, but with an aura that no one dared to approach. Then he casually turned the gun in his hand in the palm of his hand. Without standing up or changing his movements, he directly fired a shot in the direction where Feng Ling had just hit the bull's-eye more than 100 meters away. No one expected that a gunshot would suddenly come from behind. They were all shocked, but in the blink of an eye, they saw that the target 50 meters in front of Feng Ling was instantly shot through the middle, and Feng Ling's bullet was also shot down. Nanheng tossed the spear in his hand onto the stone table. His expression was indifferent, as if he hadn't fired the shot just now. He said indifferently, "Continue practicing." Han Jin, Xiao Su, Feng Ling, the members who were training, boss directly shot Feng Ling's bullet down. Wasn't it obvious that he didn't care about Feng Ling's results at all? Now that they were told to continue practicing, Feng Ling was already looked down upon by boss. If they continued to practice, wouldn't boss throw up watching them? TSK, fortunately this Feng Ling was not a woman. Otherwise he would really suspect whether boss was actually interested in Feng Ling or not, but this boy was only 13 years old. Even if there might be something wrong with boss's sexual orientation, he wouldn't go so far as to attack a child, right? Feng Ling didn't think much of the suddenly hollow target in front of her. Everyone had 3 chances to shoot. As usual, she loaded the bullets and continued to shoot. The last 2 consecutive shots accurately hit the bull's-eye, passed through the empty bull's-eye, and landed on a tree trunk not far away, leaving a deep bullet mark. After finishing, Feng Ling neatly handed the gun to the next person and turned to return to the team. After shooting training, they temporarily rested for 10 minutes. Feng Ling turned to the outside of the training ground to pick up the half bottle of mineral water she had drunk. This position was very close to Nanheng's, but she didn't go over. She only saw that Nanheng was surrounded by several members, and many of them were asking him for advice on shooting skills. To put it bluntly, they were trying to curry favor with boss. Feng Ling took another sip of water, screwed the mineral water bottle, and turned to leave. Suddenly she caught a glimpse of Fat Tai, who usually liked to fool around in Team 1, stretching out his leg to block her. Feng Ling only glanced at him indifferently. Not only was she not tripped, but she also raised her leg to counterattack. Fat Tai was secretly laughing, but unexpectedly, Feng Ling's leg had already greeted him. He felt a pain in his leg and jumped up from his seat. The next moment his buttocks were kicked again. Fat Tai clutched his buttocks in pain and began to howl. As he cried, he jumped to Nanhang's side and shouted, "Boss, quickly control this boy Feng Ling. He kicked my buttocks." Nanheng glanced at Fat Tai and then at Feng Ling, who was behind him. Feng Ling also rolled her eyes at Fat Tai. What was the use of asking Nanheng to control her? Boss nominally led Team 1, but in fact he didn't care about anything at all. He was completely a hands-off boss and left everything to the deputy drill master Han Jin, who probably didn't care about it at all. Besides, why should he care about her? What relationship did she have with him? Did he need to care about her? Just as Feng Ling turned around and was about to put her mineral water aside, she suddenly heard the man's indifferent voice. Fat Tai likes to fool around. Do you really want to stoop to his level? If you kick him a few more times he won't need to lose weight anymore. I'm afraid that he will be swollen for the rest of his life. Fat Tai, boss, are you sure you care about Feng Ling? Aren't you openly and secretly insulting me? Feng Ling glanced at him and replied, "And next time I'll kick him in another place. I guarantee that next time he will be more evenly swollen." Fat Tai, boss, help. There was a burst of laughter around. Nanheng also snorted and raised his foot to kick away Fat Tai, who was about to pounce on him for help. How can you put on such a pitiful expression in front of me with your fat face? Hurry up and lose weight. If you can't lose 15 pounds in a month, get out of my sight and join another team. Fat Tai, sob, I feel so wronged. Although I am fat, I am flexible. If I am not flexible enough, how can I have the ability to enter Team 1? Boss, you are discriminating against me. At this time Han Jin walked over to Feng Ling. Seeing her indifferent attitude as if she still didn't like to blend in with the others, he said, "Have you learned how to shoot a long time ago? Your marksmanship is not bad. Are you interested in learning professional long-range sniping?" Feng Ling glanced at Han Jin. "I can shoot, but I haven't learned long-range sniping." Han Jin nodded. In this month he really liked this child Feng Ling. Although she was a little young, she was really outstanding. Our base has been established for so many years, and there are less than 5 people who have reached the standard of long-range sniping, among which the best is Boss Lee. You'd better learn from them in the future and try to get on good terms with Boss. Let him teach you. Chapter 755. Han Jin was startled and immediately laughed. You're really a clean stream in our base. Among these hundreds of people, I'm afraid only you, Feng Ling, dare to say in front of Boss that you don't like him. Boss's temper is a bit bad, but do you really hate him so openly? Han Jin paused and laughed. Nanheng was about to pick up the gun on the stone table when his fingers paused. Fat Tai wanted to play coquettish with Boss again, but when he suddenly saw Boss's eyes turn cold, the fat all over his body trembled, and he subconsciously avoided to the side, not daring to come closer. Nanheng's expression was very calm, and he glanced at Feng Ling lightly. Feng Ling didn't deny it or say much, but just turned away, not intending to take Han Jin's suggestion seriously. Han Jin's words were just a joke, but he didn't expect that Feng Ling was really cold. He turned his head and glanced at Boss. After all, the training of long-range snipers was recently mentioned by Boss at the base meeting, and he also mentioned Feng Ling's potential. If it weren't for Boss, Han Jin would never dare to make this decision. But now, had Feng Ling unknowingly rejected Boss? As if seeing the coldness in Boss's eyes, the air around the shooting training ground seemed to freeze, and the people around didn't dare to breathe. Boss, about the sniper. Han Jin hesitated for a moment, but in the end he still plucked up the courage to ask. Nanheng played with the gun in his hand with one hand and glanced at the direction in which Feng Ling left. Give him a chance to train his physical fitness for 2 years. If his physical fitness still doesn't meet the standard after 2 years, he will automatically give up the spot of long-range sniper training. There was no warmth in Nanheng's voice. Li Nanheng told himself that Feng Ling was indeed very talented, had good marksmanship, and was at the right age to start training, so he temporarily gave up the spot. If it weren't for the fact that 11 base really needed this kind of talented newcomer, he would have kicked him out of the base. Although 11 base was under the jurisdiction of Li Nanheng, the Li family had a lot of things to deal with. He had been trained in 11 base since he was a child and took over the base after he grew up. Now he had to go back to the Li family to deal with some things. The base would be temporarily managed by the U.S. Police Headquarters and the Los Angeles Military Affairs Department for 2 years, as well as the people sent by the Li family. In other words, in the next 2 years, Li Nanheng would not appear in 11 base. Before leaving, Li Nanheng invited the brothers in the base to a 7-star hotel in Los Angeles. This hotel was currently the most expensive and luxurious hotel in Los Angeles. It was resplendent and luxurious. Seeing that Li Nanheng's car had arrived, the waiters came out to greet him in an orderly manner. Just as they walked into the hotel, the lobby manager suddenly caught sight of Feng Ling, glanced at her, and raised his eyebrows in surprise. This kid. Wasn't he the guy who accidentally broke into their red wine cup tower 2 months ago? The lobby manager stared at Feng Ling for a few seconds, but Feng Ling walked straight in as if she didn't know him. She was wearing the same black uniform as the people brought by Mr. Li, and the people of 11 Base were not to be trifled with. The lobby manager didn't know who she was and didn't dare to say anything, but he still glanced at Feng Ling from time to time. Nanheng walked in front, but it didn't mean that he didn't notice the change in the face of the lobby manager behind him. The tall man paused in his footsteps. His clear, black eyes swept over Feng Ling, who was being watched, and then he coldly glanced at the lobby manager. What? Do you know each other? The lobby manager hesitated for a moment. He felt that this Feng Ling looked much thinner than the others. He didn't know if he sneaked in, so he turned to Nanheng and said with a smile, "Mr. Li, his name is Feng Ling, right?" Nanheng's cold expression didn't change. He glanced coldly at Feng Ling, who was still expressionless, and said indifferently, "What?" A few months ago he knocked down the red wine cup tower in the lobby of our hotel, and dozens of high-end crystal glasses were broken on the ground. Our boss saw that he was young and didn't have enough money to pay for it, so he asked him to work in the back kitchen of the hotel for a month to pay for the crystal glasses, but he only worked in the back kitchen for a week and then ran away. If he weren't young, we would have called the police. After all, the crystal glasses were worth a lot of money. Feng Ling knew what was waiting for her from the moment she walked into this hotel. She not only worked in the back kitchen for a week but also broke a lot of high-end tableware in the back kitchen. Why did she leave? Of course, it was because the people in this hotel, from the waiters in the lobby to the apprentices in the back kitchen, were all snobbish. They thought that he was young and easy to bully, so they made trouble for him in every way. They even thought that he could be played like a monkey because he was young. They touched her bottom line again and again. In the end, she kicked over the dishwasher in the back kitchen and left. Even 10 security guards in this kind of hotel couldn't beat her, so they couldn't stop her. After hearing the lobby manager's words, Nanheng turned to look at Feng Ling. "Is there such a thing?" Feng Ling said calmly, "Yes, after I earn money from a mission, I will immediately pay back the money for the glasses. I won't tarnish the reputation of the base." Nanheng remained calm, but the lobby manager said sarcastically, "Mr. Li, I heard that the people selected by 11 Base are not ordinary people. They won't take pity on such a little beggar, right? Why did they take him in?" 2 months ago, she passed by the glass window of our hotel and saw there was a leftover steak and pork bone rice inside. She was probably hungry and wanted to come in to take them away, but our hotel has its own rules, so we couldn't let her take them away. When she was chased out by our security guards, she beat them up with just a few moves and even knocked over the wineglass tower. Nanheng didn't speak at first, but his eyes were looking straight at Feng Ling, who had been standing there expressionlessly. When the lobby manager secretly laughed and thought that Mr. Li would definitely drive this brat out, Nanheng first called his name. "Feng Ling," then he said, "Besides steak and pork bone rice, what else do you want to eat?" The lobby manager's expression instantly changed. He turned his eyes to Feng Ling in disbelief. Feng Ling also raised her eyes to look at Nanheng, wondering why he didn't get angry. Obviously, she had embarrassed 11 Base, hadn't she? As soon as she met the man's eyes, Feng Ling paused and said, "Those two look good, but I didn't eat them at that time. I don't know how they taste. Want to try them?" Feng Ling glanced at him again and then nodded. Nanheng coldly glanced at the dumbfounded lobby manager. "Give him 5 steaks and 5 bowls of pork bone rice. If it's not enough, order more." Lobby manager. Dash. Chapter 756. Feng Ling. "I can't eat so much." Nanheng glanced at her. "Eat as much as you can. Look at how thin you are. You can't even eat a few servings of rice. How much room do you expect your physical strength to grow?" Feng Ling, but he couldn't expect her to grow from a 13-year-old boy who weighed more than 80 kilograms to a fatty who weighed 180 kilograms. The lobby manager was surprised that Mr. Li took such good care of him. He didn't dare to speak anymore and could only quickly turn around and ask the waiter to take these people in. At the same time, the lobby manager also smiled at Feng Ling. "Young Master Feng, in addition to steak and pork bone rice, our hotel has other more high-end specialties, such as airship seafood or Feng Ling's expression didn't change at all because of his deliberately exaggerated young master Feng. She completely ignored him and turned to go upstairs with the team. The lobby manager stood there a little awkwardly and glared at Feng Ling's back. However, when he suddenly saw Nanheng's cold gaze, he immediately shrank his shoulders, shivered all over, and quickly put on an apologetic smile. When they reached the banquet hall upstairs, Feng Ling was about to walk in with Fat Tai and the others, when Han Jin suddenly patted her on the shoulder. "Feng Ling, boss wants you to go over." Feng Ling looked back. "Didn't I come here for dinner? Why did he call me?" Han Jin spread his hands and shrugged, meaning that he didn't know. Feng Ling thought for 2 seconds, turned around and walked back. When she came to the marble escalator, she saw a tall man wearing the same black uniform as her playing with a silver high-end lighter. She glanced at his back and walked over. "Boss." The man looked back at her. "And? Just an in? Didn't he call her for anything else?" Feng Ling was a little surprised, but since Nanheng didn't speak, she couldn't turn around and leave, so she took 2 steps closer and came to his side. "Boss, what's up?" The silver lighter made a crisp sound in the man's hand, and the man glanced at her indifferently. "How much money do you owe here?" Feng Ling raised her eyelids and looked at the lobby manager who was busy greeting other members of 11 base on the first floor. "The cups I broke are said to be crystal cups, and the cheapest one is at least more than 100 yuan. Plus the dishwasher and tableware I kicked over, I estimate that it's about 20,000 yuan. Nanheng pressed her head with one hand. Feng Ling paused because of his action and looked up at him. The man who was much taller than her lowered his dark eyes and lowered his head to approach her. His voice and breath were both very cold. "You dare to sell yourself here for 20,000 yuan for a month?" "I didn't sell myself here, but I really don't have the money to pay them back. If it weren't for the fact that the people in the kitchen are so annoying, I would have worked here for a month before leaving. After all, I did make a mistake first." The man sneered and pressed his hand heavily on her head again. Feng Ling couldn't avoid him until the man had ravaged her head enough and let go of her. He glanced at her messy and inexplicably sexy hairstyle and smiled coldly. "You still know how to be moral. It seems that your nature is not bad." Feng Ling's face was cold. "What made boss think that there's something wrong with my character? All right, go in and eat with them. Don't worry about the small problem of the hotel. I'll help you solve it." Hearing this, Feng Ling instinctively wanted to thank him, but the man continued. "The condition is that you train your physical strength well from today onwards. 2 years later, when I return to the base, if you still can't hold a long-range sniper rifle firmly, you can get out of Team 1. Feng Ling originally wanted to thank him for helping her solve this problem. When she had money in the future, she would definitely return this 20,000 yuan to him. In the end, she swallowed the words back into her stomach and glanced at the man without saying anything. Forget it. Anyway, she didn't need to see him for at least the next 2 years. When 5 portions of steak and 5 portions of pork bone rice were delivered, the lobby manager directly asked someone to place them in front of Feng Ling one by one. The people at this table were all members of Team 1. Although they had heard the gist of it when they were downstairs, they didn't expect that boss really planned to let Feng Ling eat so much. Who didn't know that Feng Ling ate the least among the brothers? Usually, everyone often advised him that it was the age of growth and that he must eat more to be as tall as everyone else. Otherwise, if his physical strength couldn't meet the requirements and he couldn't keep up with the height, boss would definitely think of ways to bully him. But this much, the amount of rice was not small. How could she eat it all? Feng Ling was very calm. If he asked her to eat, she would eat. In the end, if she couldn't eat anymore, she wouldn't really be stuffed to death. In fact, her appetite was not small. However, compared with the group of big guys in the base who wolfed down their food, her usual appetite became poor cat food. Some people even said that she was like a little kitten. As long as she didn't stretch out her claws, she was very beautiful and cute, but once she got angry and stretched out her claws, no one could catch her. It really made people gnash their teeth with hatred. Today, for the first time, Li Nanheng sat at the same table with the members of Team 1. It should be known that boss usually sat with the drill masters. After all, he didn't have anything in common with this group of people. But today boss actually sat here like this. He even sat down next to Feng Ling. Fat Tai silently whispered to Xiao Su next to him, "Boss, aren't you a bit too considerate of Feng Ling?" In fact, Fat Tai felt that his words should be heard by boss, so there were some words that he didn't dare to say. What he wanted to say was whether there was really a problem with boss's sexual orientation. Not only was there a problem, but he even didn't let go of a child. Was he planning to raise a handsome boy from a young age? Xiao Su said coldly, "If you were as capable as Feng Ling when you were 13 years old, boss would also take care of you." Fat Tai, as a flexible fatty, he was actually despised again. Although Feng Ling learns everything quickly and his shooting skills are also very accurate, after all, boss is really too kind to him. If he asked us to eat together, we should eat together, but he specially ordered food for Feng Ling. Obviously, he is supporting Feng Ling. Also, boss has never sat with us before, but now he directly sat next to Feng Ling. Chapter 757. Fat Tai had just finished muttering and was about to take a sip of water when he almost spat it out because of Nan Heng's words. He coughed a few times until his fat face turned red. 10 portions? Even if he was fat, he couldn't eat so much. Fat Tai instantly understood the feeling of being specially taken care of by his boss. He silently smacked his lips, and this time he didn't even dare to let out a fart. But in fact, the main problem didn't have much to do with the steak and pork bone rice, right? Wasn't the important thing that boss was sitting next to Feng Ling? Feng Ling pushed the rice in front of her forward. No, I can't eat it. Just give the extra 4 portions to Fat Tai. Fat Tai hurriedly shook his head and waved his hand, looking at Nan Heng for help. Nan Heng didn't look at him, nor did he allow her to give the rice away. He just said indifferently, whatever. After returning to the base in the evening, you can do physical training for 5 hours. Just make sure you're full. 5 hours? Feng Ling's eyes flickered. Fat Tai and the others no longer envied boss for taking care of him but looked at him with sympathy. The physical training of 11 base was simply devil training, okay? 1 hour could take half of a person's life. 5 hours of physical training? Boss probably didn't intend to let Feng Ling see the sun when she was 14 years old. Feng Ling turned to look at the man beside her who could almost decide her life and death with one sentence. Nan Heng glanced at him meaningfully. He was casually wearing a black combat jacket and a black t-shirt, which clearly outlined the man's perfect figure. At such a close distance, the man's pure hormonal scent almost covered the excess air around Feng Ling. More importantly, the man's eyes were faintly dangerous, as if reminding her that even if he would leave 11 base for 2 years, he would not leave until the day after tomorrow, and at least he would torture her for 2 more nights. Just when Feng Ling pursed her lips speechlessly, the man suddenly threw a pair of chopsticks at her. Eat. At least 2 bowls. Otherwise, I won't care if you collapse from hunger during the night training. You still have to continue training. Did he like torturing people so much? Or did he just find her an eyesore? Feng Ling picked up her chopsticks and began to eat. After eating a portion, she looked at the steak by the side and could not eat at all. At this time, Fat Tai suddenly interjected, steak is a good thing to strengthen muscles. Little Feng Ling, look at yourself. Not only are you thin, you don't even have any muscles. Last time when we were training, your arms were exposed. They were white and slender like a little girl. Eat more, it's good for you. Feng Ling immediately raised her eyes and glared at Fat Tai. Fat Tai continued to gloat, but before he could finish, the waiter who had just left came back with 10 steaks and 10 pig bone rice. As soon as he saw the things they brought in, Fat Tai only took one glance and instantly let out a loud burp. His eyes immediately froze. Feng Ling cut the steak and slowly stuffed it into her mouth. She glanced at the dumbfounded Fat Tai with a hint of a smile and said, hurry up and turn all the fat on your body into muscle. More. It'll be good for you. Fat Tai. What the F***CK? If I eat all this, I'll die. He had only made a few sarcastic remarks about Feng Ling, but boss actually wanted to kill him in such a despicable way. They were all men. Why was there such a difference in treatment? At night, everyone returned to the base. It was rare that they didn't have to train at night. After eating and drinking their fill, everyone went back to take a shower and rest. However, Feng Ling was carried out of her residence by Nan Heng at 9 o'clock in the middle of the night like a kitten and directly brought to the training ground. Feng Ling ate 2 portions of rice and steak each and felt uncomfortable. Now that she was suddenly brought here, Feng Ling, who usually didn't like to show her emotions, had an obviously ugly expression on her face. Boss, my stomach is uncomfortable. Can't you let me lie down for a while? However, before she could finish speaking, Nan Heng forcefully pushed her over to the horizontal bar. Then, with an indifferent expression, he grabbed her collar and lifted her onto the horizontal bar. Feng Ling had to grab both sides of the bar to steady herself. At the same time, she looked at him with a strange expression. However, the man looked at her obviously uncomfortable appearance and did not have the slightest sympathy. Instead, he said disdainfully, shouldn't you use exercise to speed up digestion if you feel uncomfortable? Go back to bed and lie down. Are you planning to vomit and defecate tomorrow morning because of indigestion? Is it that serious? It was good enough for Feng Ling to eat her fill since she was a child. Who knew that indigestion could happen? Nan Heng snorted. I gave you a chance to strengthen your physical training. Are you not going to appreciate it? Appreciate it? First, he deliberately made her look like this, then he took her out and threw her onto the horizontal bar to force her to exercise to digest the food in her stomach. Anyone could appreciate it if they wanted, but she didn't. However, Feng Ling was still stared at by Nan Heng. She did 3 consecutive hours of physical training on the training ground. In the end, when she did 97 push-ups, she really couldn't get up. She lay on the ground powerlessly and became like a corpse, motionless. Nan Heng walked over and raised his foot to kick her leg. Continue, there are still 3 left. Boss, it's been 3 hours. Feng Ling lay on the ground motionlessly and closed her eyes to say, I owe you 3 today. Next time I'll make up for 30. Hearing her words, the man sneered in a low voice and narrowed his eyes at her coldly. Didn't you vow to give me a shoulder throw? You can't even hold on for the last 3 push-ups. With your little ability, not to mention a shoulder throw, even if you really go out to do a mission in the future, you'll be defeated by your own physical strength before you meet the enemy. Feng Ling frowned. Even though the man's black leather boots were pressing on her back, she still gritted her teeth, and with her already weak body and the weight on her back, she raised her arms bit by bit. With sweat dripping from her forehead, she said in a low voice, 98. Nan Heng looked at her indifferently, his foot still on her back. Until the kitten, who temporarily didn't even have the strength to stretch out her claws, counted to 100, he withdrew his foot, turned around, and pointed to the muscle training equipment not far away with his chin. Go up and stretch your limbs for half an hour. Chapter 758. It wasn't until dawn that Feng Ling returned to her single room to rest wearily. However, as soon as the alarm clock rang, she opened her eyes instinctively. Even though she felt that she was about to collapse, she still forced herself to get up, changed into clean clothes and went out for morning training. Nan Heng would leave 11 base early tomorrow morning. He would be away for 2 years or even longer, but he didn't sleep all night. Last night, probably because he really couldn't sleep and really wanted to find someone to torment, only Feng Ling, an unlucky guy whom he disliked, was picked out. During the morning training, Nan Heng sat aside, still playing with the silver lighter in boredom, and looked at Feng Ling, who was obviously exhausted but still gritted her teeth and insisted on doing every movement in the crowd. Boss, last night, several brothers of Team 3 and Team 4 saw that you brought Feng Ling to train alone. This morning they were all talking about whether you really like Feng Ling. Xiao Su said in a low voice. Nan Heng raised his eyebrows coldly. What do you mean? That is, they all said that you want to sleep with Feng Ling after he grows up. Xiao Su coughed, couldn't help gossiping, and finally said it. Nan Heng suddenly paused with the lighter in his hand and coldly glanced at Xiao Su's face. Sleep with who? As soon as Xiao Su saw the boss's expression, he instantly felt that he was gossiping in the wrong direction. He felt a chill on his neck and couldn't help shaking the goosebumps on his body. He coughed and whispered, that is to say, Boss, you like Feng Ling very much, want to raise him up and then eat him? Nan Heng turned the phone, his fingers paused on the side of the phone, and his eyes indifferently glanced in the direction of the black-haired boy in the first row of the crowd. Raise him up? Eat him up. Xiao Su trembled with fear on the side. He didn't know whether the boss was provoked by these words or something else, but at this moment, the boss's expression was really incomprehensible. It was cold and lethal, but there was a trace of emotion that he couldn't figure out. TSK, how terrifying. Halfway through the morning training, Feng Ling's lips looked much whiter than usual under the scorching sun in the morning, and the boy's ink-black eyes were a little dim, but he still made accurate postures. Even though Han Jin could see that Feng Ling was a little exhausted today, he still persisted. Today's sun was particularly big. It had been scorching since 8 o'clock in the morning, making people's heads hurt. But morning training had its own rules. Unless you were so sick that you couldn't get up, you had to crawl to the training ground even if you had to. Not a single delay was allowed. Last night, boss's training of Feng Ling was too harsh. Not to mention the newbies, even the veterans in the base might not be able to stand it for a whole night. At this time, Kay walked in from outside. Kay did not belong to Team 1 for the time being. He was in Team 2, but in a year or two with his qualifications he would be able to join Team 1 for training. When he walked into the training camp of Team 1, Kay looked in the direction of Feng Ling, but it was a little far away and he couldn't see Feng Ling's expression clearly. He turned to see Boss beside him, so he walked over. Boss. Nanhing took out a cigarette, bit it between his thin lips, tilted his head and lit it. Then he glanced at Kay, who had just approached. What did you find? Kay shook his head. I went to the place where Feng Ling and I met for the first time to investigate, but there was no one around and no one lived there. I couldn't find out his background at all. And in the hotel yesterday, they also said that Feng Ling only told them his name and didn't mention anything else. Even when he worked in the hotel for a week, he didn't show any identity card. If we can't find out his background, we can't find out his background at all. Very few people could remain blank under the in-depth investigation of 11 Base and didn't even have a simple detailed introduction. Unless he was really a wandering boy without parents or any source of income. Have you investigated the orphanage that we went to last time? Yes, but Director Lin and several other leaders of the orphanage have been transferred to Washington a few months ago for some reason. We can't contact them for the time being, and the rest of the people don't know anything about it. And I don't think Feng Ling can come out of a place like the orphanage. After all, there are many children in that place and they have a very normal education model. It's impossible for someone as rebellious as him to survive in that kind of place. What he said was true. But the figure in the orphanage overlapped with Feng Ling's figure again and again. Nanheng suspected and dispelled his doubts several times. He sent Kay and the investigators in the base to investigate Feng Ling's origin, but the result was still blank and there was no trace of his past. Of course, Feng Ling knew that Nanheng had always been suspicious of her, but he couldn't be sure, so he couldn't rashly do anything to him. There was really nothing to investigate about her past. What background could a child raised by a wolf have? But the most vulnerable thing about her was her gender. 11 Base would never allow a woman to stay here. But if she left 11 Base, she didn't know where else would be more suitable for her to live. Are you sure that no one was with him before he approached you? Nanheng took the cigarette between his lips, the spark between his fingers, and there was a cold light in his eyes. Is he so clean that you can completely trust him to bring him back to the base? Boss, although we can't do things completely based on intuition, I think Feng Ling is young and innocent. In his world, there are only things like food, warm clothes, fighting and playing with guns. As long as you give him a place to settle down, he can be more loyal than anyone else. And you can also see that he is not the type of person who will easily follow anyone who gives him a meal. He has pride in his bones. Probably in his eyes, only a place like 11 Base is worthy of keeping him, Kay said confidently. Because Kay had seen Feng Ling's skills with his own eyes and had been with him for so long, he was very sure that Feng Ling was a person with absolutely no motives. Nanheng didn't speak but looked through the white smoke at the team that was still training not far away. At this moment, suddenly someone in the first row fell down, and then the people around let out a low cry. Feng Ling. The deputy drill master Han Jin saw clearly in front that Feng Ling, who was training, turned pale little by little, and his lips were also completely pale. Just when he was about to continue the next training movement, the boy who had always been energetic and particularly serious in training suddenly fell down powerlessly. Fortunately, the people behind him were not far away from him and reached out to catch him. Otherwise, he would have fallen to the ground directly. She heard someone call out, "Is Feng Ling fainted from exhaustion?" Then he caught a glimpse of the commotion over there. Nanheng suddenly pressed out the cigarette in the ashtray, got up and strode over, Chapter 759. Nanheng abruptly put out the cigarette in the ashtray, got up and strode over. As soon as he saw Feng Ling being supported by the people behind the team, Nanheng narrowed his eyes slightly and dragged the person who was about to be carried over. Feng Ling was in a daze and couldn't stand still. She could only vaguely hear someone talking, but she couldn't open her eyes. When she was forcibly dragged over, her head hit the man's strong chest, and the refreshing smell of cigarettes poured into her nose. She frowned, and the next moment she was carried on the man's shoulder with one hand. This action almost made Feng Ling vomit, but she really had no strength. She was so exhausted that she couldn't even lift her fingers. She closed her eyes and her breathing became heavier. It was really uncomfortable. Continue to practice. I'll send her to the infirmary. Nanheng completely ignored everyone's gazes. Without a word, he carried Feng Ling up and immediately suppressed everyone's worries. Feng Ling still wanted to maintain a little dignity, but after being carried up like this, she really had no choice. When Nanheng took the man away, his eyes were cold, and even Han Jin could feel the awe-inspiring aura from his boss. He did not dare to ask anything and directly called Xiao Su, who was also stunned, to follow him. Hurry up and help. See if the doctors in the infirmary are here. If not, quickly call them back. Xiao Su nodded and quickly turned to run out. When Nanheng walked out of the training camp of Team 1, Feng Ling couldn't open her eyes in a daze and could only say with difficulty in a hoarse voice, almost breathing, "Put me down." Guessing that Feng Ling was uncomfortable because of the shoulder, Nanheng put Feng Ling down from his shoulder. However, at the moment when Feng Ling staggered and couldn't stand firm, he caught a glimpse of her pale lips and haggard and transparent face that was whiter than a woman's. He casually carried her in his arms and said in a cold voice like a cold lake in a snowy night, "You can collapse after a whole night of physical training and 2 hours of morning exercise. You're really a good for nothing." Feng Ling finally opened her eyes with some difficulty. Watching the man's cold face as he carried her toward the infirmary, she said, "Put me down. I can walk by myself." Her voice was very low but full of determination. Xiao Su, who was walking in front, heard Feng Ling's words and couldn't help praying for him in his heart. "Little ancestor, don't court death. Boss's face is almost frozen. It's already incredibly kind of him to carry you away. How dare you court death? Do you really want to be regarded as a waste and kicked out of 11 base by boss? Do you want to be regarded as trash and kicked out of 11 base? You have no one to rely on and have no identity certificate. Even if you want to be a child, no one will hire you. You are only 13 years old. How can you survive?" Their boss had always been merciless to those who were useless. When he became heartless, no one could stop him. If he really threw her down, even if she didn't die, she would be crippled, so she just stared at him warily. Seeing that he didn't throw her away and didn't seem to be bothered to say anything, she finally learned to be obedient. She barely suppressed her pride and didn't say anything more. She didn't say anything more. The youth's warm breath hit his chest, and he could feel the warmth of the youth's breath through the black uniform. Nanheng thought expressionlessly that this guy looked so pitiful. His voice was as soft and hoarse as a little girl's. Those who didn't know him might think he was acting coquettishly. Nanheng really didn't want to argue with a patient. The point was that this patient fell down because of his intensive training last night. He sent her to the infirmary. The doctors in the infirmary were all there. After taking Feng Ling in, they were about to take off her clothes for examination. Even if they didn't take off her clothes, they had to lift her clothes and listen to her so that they could know what was wrong with her. After lying on the bed, Feng Ling glanced outside the door to make sure that Nanheng and Xiao Su had not come in. When the doctor was about to lift her clothes, she quickly raised her hand to press the doctor's hand, looked at the doctor and said hoarsely, "I'm fine. I just couldn't stand the intensive training last night. I only went back to rest for half an hour in the morning and didn't have time to eat breakfast before continuing the morning training. I'm just exhausted." Xiao Su said that you suddenly fainted. Generally speaking, many young men in our base have very good physical fitness. Whether you are exhausted or suffering from heat stroke, since you are here, you have to have a good examination. Come on, take off your clothes. The doctor glanced at him. Having been a doctor at the base for so long, it was the first time that he had seen such a beautiful boy. However, he didn't expect that not only was he so delicate and tender, but it was also so difficult for him to take off his clothes for examination. However, the doctor did not dare to speak carelessly. After all, he was only a doctor at the base and no one here was to be trifled with. Nowadays, there were many feminine men who looked like women, and young men who looked prettier than little girls were also fair and tender. The one in front of him was probably the best of the fair and tender young men. The doctor was not surprised at all. Moreover, he was still young and no one could predict what he would grow into in the future. When he was in his teens, he would be a handsome young man, and when he was in his 20s, he would become a tall and rugged young man. When the doctor was about to reach out again, Feng Ling forced the doctor's hand away with the little strength she had just saved. When she sat up, she was a little breathless and said hoarsely, "Can you give me a glass of water first?" Seeing that his lips were indeed white and a little dry, and he probably had some symptoms of heat stroke, the doctor sighed and turned to pour a glass of warm water. Feng Ling took it and said thank you. After taking a few sips, she raised her head and said, "I'm much better." "Just a glass of water? Why didn't I know that this water was an elixir?" The doctor glanced at him suspiciously and reached out to touch Feng Ling's forehead. Feng Ling was not used to being touched by others since she was a child. Probably because she stayed with wolves when she was a child, she was very sensitive and hostile to any touch. At this moment, she suppressed her instinct and cautiously sat on the bed to say, "I'm really fine." "No, it seems that your mental state is not very good. How long did you do the intensive training last night?" the doctor asked. "From 11 o'clock in the evening until 5:30 in the morning," Feng Ling answered truthfully. Chapter 760. The doctor had obviously given up the plan to examine her and put the stethoscope in his hand aside. "But I think many young men in this base have endured it bit by bit. You still have a long time to go. After all, you are still young." In fact, Feng Ling also knew that boss didn't maliciously train her like this. It It was just that her physical fitness was not up to standard, at least she was still a woman inside. She really couldn't do the things that some men could do. But some things couldn't be achieved in a day. She couldn't do it now, but it didn't mean that she couldn't do it in a year. As long as she persisted every day, she believed that these physical difficulties would be overcome. It doesn't matter. I can bear it. After all, I am still young. If 1 year is not enough, then 3 years. If 3 years is not enough, then 5 years. When I am 20 years old, I will definitely not be like this anymore. When the doctor moved his hand away, Feng Ling's instinctive sense of defense also disappeared, and her voice became slightly softer. At this time, Li Nanheng walked into the infirmary. When he entered the door, he saw Feng Ling, who had just fainted, sitting on the bed, holding a glass of water and saying this. The boy's hair was very fine and soft. The wind outside the infirmary blew in through the window and gently brushed against his forehead. He didn't know where the wind brushed, but his heart was inexplicably itchy. Nanheng coldly waved away the inexplicable itch in his heart and walked over. Boss. When the doctor looked back and saw him, he immediately stood up straight. Even if he was not a member of the training team of this base, he instinctively stood solemnly and did not dare to neglect him. Nanheng responded coldly and walked in. His upper body was still covered with a black jacket, and a strand of short black hair hung down as he lowered his head to look at Feng Ling. Just by standing here, he looked extremely masculine, more like a dormant ice beast, coldly staring at the boy whose face was still a little pale. Feng Ling saw his cold eyes, remembered the process when this man suddenly carried her all the way to the infirmary, and then looked at him like this, and inexplicably felt that her legs were a little soft. Was it because she was tired last night? But now Feng Ling was not in the mood to appreciate Boss Li's beauty. After all, she was almost forced to take off her clothes by the doctor, and it was not convenient for him to hear her taking off her clothes. Otherwise, if he knew that she refused to take off her clothes, he would probably be suspicious again. But now that she was sitting on the bed in the infirmary, she met Nanheng's eyes that seemed to be sizing her up and yet had no warmth. She really felt that there was no way out. What happened to him? Nanheng took off his coat, threw it on the bed where Feng Ling was, and asked in a low and cold voice. This question was obviously directed at the doctor. I took a quick look at him. He's just not in a good state of mind. It's because of physical exhaustion. He didn't eat anything in the morning and he was exposed to the sun for 2 hours when he was already exhausted. He's beyond his physical limit, but it's only his body that's weak. His mind and consciousness are still very clear. There's no other major problem. He'll be fine after a day of rest and a good meal. The doctor said simply. After all, the people in this base were all young men. They were not so pretentious. There was no need to explain too much. Besides, Boss Li was just the boss here, not their parents, so he certainly didn't need the doctor to explain too much. Hearing the doctor's words, Feng Ling secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She thought that things would end here. However, unexpectedly at this moment, Nanheng suddenly pulled up her trousers. Before Feng Ling had time to stop him, her entire white and slender legs were suddenly exposed, including her knees which were still red and swollen from last night's physical training. Feng Ling hurriedly pushed the man's hand away and was about to pull down her rolled-up trousers, only to hear that the man didn't take her delicate and white calves seriously at all. She didn't ask much but only added to the doctor, "Deal with the injury on his knees." This injury? The doctor glanced at the injury on Feng Ling's legs. This was a simple injury at first glance. It was just a broken skin with a little blood oozing out and a little bruise. Usually, it was not uncommon for members of this base to have such injuries. They almost didn't need any medicine at all and would recover in a few days. But this, Boss Li wanted him to apply medicine? The doctor first took a deep look at Feng Ling, then maintained a very calm expression and said 2 words, "Okay." Standing behind, Xiao Su felt that his image of Boss had gradually become disillusioned. Didn't he mercilessly go to special training last night? Today he felt sorry for him? *CK. Boss, aren't you being too dishonest? TSK. Xiao Su secretly looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting on the bed with a dumbfounded look and seemed to be unaware of the situation she was in, and secretly sympathized with her in his heart. Although it was a good thing to be liked by Boss, you could only blame little Feng Ling for not being king woman. If the elders of the Li family knew this, they would probably blow up the base and dig him out to kill him. There's no need to apply medicine to such a small wound. Boss, I'll go back and rest for 2 hours. With great difficulty, Feng Ling pushed Nanheng's hand away and moved her legs to the side. I don't have any intention of using my illness to slack off. Just let me rest for 2 hours. I'll definitely make up for the training I missed in the morning and the afternoon. Nan Heng glanced at her lightly. Although 11 base doesn't sympathize with the weak, ordinary people will have this kind of normal reaction when their physical strength exceeds the limit. If you exceed the limit a few times, you will find that your potential is infinitely magnified little by little, and your endurance will gradually expand. You can rest today and don't have to go back in the afternoon. If you really want to practice, I don't mind continuing to practice with you tonight. Anyway, my car won't arrive until tomorrow morning. Feng Ling, she would rather make up for the morning training in the afternoon than accept his devil training again. In her current state, if she did it again, she would probably die on the training ground. After the doctor applied medicine to Feng Ling's wound, he suddenly received a very rich look from Xiao Su and consciously walked out of the infirmary. Do you want me to carry you back, or can you walk back by yourself? Seeing Feng Ling put down her trousers to cover her incredibly white calf, Nan Heng's expression was very indifferent when he spoke, and he still looked cold and dignified. At this time, Feng Ling felt that Nan Heng was actually not only domineering and dangerous, and she felt that in front of this man, there were not always sharp knives and swords. Chapter 761. In the end, of course, she chose to walk by herself. However, halfway through, her waist suddenly tightened. The man behind her saw that she was walking at a snail's pace and impatiently reached out his long arms to pick her up. Feng Ling. Boss, I can walk by myself. Watch you crawl back slowly? What a waste of time. Nan Heng didn't even look at her and strode back to her residence with her in his arms. Seeing him like this, Feng Ling's body was indeed not very comfortable, but she did not dare to show too much discomfort. She could only cautiously maintain a solemn expression. When they arrived at the residence, the man placed her on the bed and Feng Ling rolled on the bed and directly rolled into it. The man who was still leaning over the bed saw her roll into the bed and his eyes darkened. Why did he unintentionally feel that he was going to take advantage of a little girl? What did this guy mean by hiding in the bed so sensitively? Thank you, boss. I wish you a pleasant trip tomorrow, Feng Ling said, leaning against the bed with her back against the wall. Nan Heng turned to look at Feng Ling. His deep eyes were devoid of emotion. He glanced at Feng Ling, who was indeed very thin. Feng Ling still leaned against the wall and raised her head, wondering if her attitude was too calm and indifferent, which made Boss Li unhappy, so she could only force a smile at him. The doctor said I should have a good rest. Can I rest now? Nan Heng was originally standing by the bed with his body bent over. From this bed, he could clearly see the youth's slightly pale and somewhat innocent face. Even the clean fine hair on his cheeks could be seen clearly. Nan Heng narrowed his eyes. Feng Ling, how old are you this year? How old? Feng Ling pondered for a moment. I should be about to have my 14th birthday, but I don't know when my birthday is, but the person who took me and set the September of every year as my birthday so that I can remember my age. In this way I will be 14 next month. What's wrong, boss? Do I have to be questioned again and again in the base just because I'm so young? Feng Ling obviously didn't understand why Nan Heng suddenly asked her about her age. Originally, Nan Heng wanted to say that he looked like he was not even 13 years old. How could a young man grow so small and skinny? But in the end he was about to turn 14. Nan Heng didn't expect that Feng Ling would be so disgusted by him asking about his age and thought he was trying to find an excuse to drive him out of the base. Boss, don't worry and leave. I promise that after 2 years I will be able to pass all the tests. Boss, you don't need to worry about me anymore. Feng Ling tried very hard to maintain a calm tone as she asked him to leave. However, Nan Heng appeared not to have heard her. He suddenly raised his hand and grabbed her shoulder, pulling her over from the wall. Feng Ling shuddered and subconsciously tried to dodge, but the man's hand held her shoulder firmly. He then moved down her arm and finally landed on her calf that she had just revealed. Feng Ling was confused. Her instinct to dislike being touched seemed to have been touched. She resisted the urge to kick him away, but her eyes were much colder as she looked up at him. What are you doing? Seeing the cold and sharp look in the boy's eyes, Nan Heng said coldly, You don't have any muscles in your body. It sounded like he was a little disgusted. Feng Ling. I will train my muscles sooner or later. The man sneered, threw her a look that didn't look favorably on her, and directly left. Seeing the man close the door from outside, Feng Ling let out a long sigh and lay down on the bed weakly. She didn't think about anything but just wanted to sleep. Nan Heng remembered that the wound on Feng Ling's knee had just been treated. He turned back to open the door and was about to remind her to change into a loose pair of pants, lest the medicine went to waste. However, when he opened the door, he saw the boy lying on the bed and quickly falling asleep. Nanheng? He was really King brave. How could he fall asleep like this? He was going to leave the base tomorrow. Why didn't he feel any reluctance? Were the children nowadays so King heartless? Looking at the boy who was sleeping motionlessly and was as soft and obedient as a little white cat, Nanheng took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and his chest rose and fell. With a bang, he closed the door and left. Feng Ling had always been sensitive. The moment the door was opened again, she woke up. When she heard the door slam, she opened her eyes and stared at the door in a daze. Fortunately, it had not been smashed. She muttered silently, "Lunatic." Early the next morning, Feng Ling, who had rested for a day, went to the canteen of the base in good spirits and planned to have a good breakfast. However, she didn't expect that most of the members of the base were in the canteen at this time. Because Boss Lee rarely came to the canteen today, it was inevitable that he would leave the base for some good memories, so he planned to have breakfast with everyone. After entering, Feng Ling saw the tall figure sitting on the long table by the window. She just glanced at him and didn't go over to say hello like the other members, nor did she say any words of reluctance. She turned and went inside to get food for herself. Then she carried a large portion of food to the farthest seat from Nanheng, picked up the tableware and began to eat, completely ignoring the man who was waiting for her to say hello to him. At this moment, even Kay felt that Feng Ling was too arrogant. Boss was going to leave. Since they met here, she had to say goodbye to him. After all, Boss would come back in 2 years and Boss would always be the boss here. Even if he was not here, he could remotely control everything in the base, so she couldn't neglect him. It was quite necessary to say goodbye to him and leave a way out for herself. But Feng Ling, this blockhead, didn't move at all. She was still sitting there eating. None of the people in the canteen went to get food. At this moment, they were all looking for opportunities to approach Nanheng and turned to see Feng Ling sitting there eating. What was this boy doing? Was he looking down on Boss Lee's status? Now in the entire canteen, only Feng Ling sitting there and Nanheng sitting by the window were eating. Was this boy so careless? Boss didn't like him. This time he probably wanted to kick him out even more. Nanheng really didn't expect that Feng Ling could be so careless. His fingers holding the tableware loosened and loosened again. In the end, he couldn't bear it anymore, threw the tableware down, got up and walked out. When he got outside, the Lee family's car was already waiting for him. He didn't know who young Master Lee was waiting for in the canteen today. Nanheng got in the car and didn't even roll down the window to look out. Drive. 2 very cold words without a trace of warmth. Chapter 762. The driver shivered and immediately started the engine without daring to say a word. After the car drove out of the base, the driver glanced at Li Nanheng through the rearview mirror. Seeing that there was some inexplicable hostility and coldness in his eyes, he asked tentatively after a while, "Young Master Li, is it because you're going back to the Li family that makes you feel uncomfortable, or did someone offend you in this base? Who are you venting your anger on?" Nanheng snorted coldly. "Do I look angry?" The driver. "Maybe you do." Nanheng didn't speak this time and indifferently looked out of the window at the scenery outside the base and the long road that quickly passed by. What was he angry about? Angry with a 13 or 14-year-old kid? And it was King guy? Nanheng raised his good-looking eyebrows and tried to find the reason. It was probably because it was rare to see such a potential newcomer, so he had to pay more attention to him. He picked up the phone and called Han Jin. After the call was connected, he said indifferently, "In the 2 years I am away, you will be responsible for strengthening Feng Ling's physical training every day. 2 years later, I want to see a basic candidate for a long-range sniper." After hanging up the phone, Han Jin had just walked into the canteen of the base and looked up, only to see that Feng Ling was still sitting inside, still eating breakfast calmly. He wanted Feng Ling to basically become a sniper in 2 years. Boss probably wanted Feng Ling to be fitted with a spring that didn't need to rest 24 hours a day. This was really a test of Feng Ling's patience. He didn't know if this child could bear it. At this moment, Feng Ling was fighting with a round boiled egg on her plate. She tried for a long time but failed to pick it up and it kept rolling in her chopsticks. In the end, she picked up the fork and stabbed it expressionlessly, biting more than half of it. She hadn't expected what kind of devil training she would face in the next 2 years, nor did she know how many people Boss Lee had told to strengthen her training before he left. On the 3rd day after Nanheng left, Feng Ling was dug out of bed by Han Jin in the middle of the night and said that she was going to do physical training. She was doing push-ups on the training ground, and Han Jin took a close-up photo of her with a cell phone in one hand and sent it to Boss Lee as if it was his work. Nan Hung was in the bedroom of the Lee family's villa. He had just come out of the shower. He rubbed his short hair with one hand and picked up the phone that had just lit up on the bed with the other. He swiped it open and saw this photo. In the photo, Fong Ling was doing push-ups. Because she had just been dug out of bed, she was not wearing a formal uniform. She was only wearing loose pajamas, and because of her push-ups, the pajamas were loose, revealing her collarbone. Nan Heng's gaze paused, moving along the beautiful collarbone to look at the young man's sweaty hair hanging between his eyebrows. He frowned and replied to Han Jin, "Tell him to put on his clothes before coming out to train." Han Jin quickly replied, "Got it," but in his heart he was confused. It was late at night and it was just a temporary special training at night. Even he had come out wearing a t-shirt. Was he going to ask Fong Ling to wear a uniform at night? After thinking about it, Han Jin simply sent another message to boss. "If Fong Ling wears a uniform during the day, I'm afraid that he will have to change his uniform every month. No matter how good the quality of the clothes is, they can't stand being worn 24 hours a day." Nanheng did not reply. However, a week later, Han Jin suddenly received a package in 11 base. When he opened it, it turned out to be a few sets of special black uniforms of the same quality as the ones Boss Lee usually wore. This kind of clothes could only be worn by the members of the base who went out on missions. The uniforms worn by the newcomers in the base were different. Although they looked similar on the surface, there was a very expensive protective layer inside which cost tens of thousands of yuan to make. Han Jin took it out and checked. There were 10 sets in total. However, the size of these 10 sets of uniforms could not be worn by other members of the base. At first glance, it seemed that only Fong Ling could wear them. Han Jin, "Boss, aren't you being too obvious with your intentions?" Fong Ling was just a child. Thinking that there might be something wrong with Boss's sexual orientation, and then thinking that he had taken a bath with Boss Lee in the bathhouse of the base and that he had picked up the soap in front of him, in an instant, he felt terrible. At night, the housekeeper of the Lee family knocked on the door and came in. Seeing that young Master Lee was still awake, he planned to come in to talk to him, only to see young Master Lee sitting on the balcony smoking. Although young Master Lee usually smoked a lot, after returning to the Lee family, his smoking addiction seemed to be particularly strong. He didn't like to go back to the Lee family and be dominated by the elders of the Lee family. He hated this place, but as the eldest son and the only heir of the Lee family, these were the responsibilities he had to bear. Even if he didn't want to go back, he had to. But usually when young Master Lee came back, he basically went to bed early. Why was he sitting on the balcony smoking at this time tonight? The housekeeper had just opened the floor-to-ceiling window and walked over with a cup of coffee in his hand. He wanted to talk to him on the pretext of delivering coffee, but when he looked down, he saw that young Master Lee was holding a cell phone in his other hand. He curiously leaned over to take a look, wanting to see who young Master Lee was talking to or what he was looking at so late at night. Otherwise, why didn't he sleep? However, the moment he leaned over, he only saw a photo of a young boy doing push-ups. Before he could see it clearly, the cell phone screen suddenly went dark. "What are you doing here?" Li Nanheng put out the cigarette, took the coffee and put it on the coffee table on the balcony, his eyes cold. The housekeeper paused and thought that the boy in the photo should be a member of 11 base, right? He didn't think that young Master Lee was willing to take over such a big responsibility of 11 base. Even when he was sent to 11 base at a young age, young Master Lee resisted for a long time and had a rebellious mentality for a long time. Finally, he gradually accepted it because of the responsibility, but he always ignored the affairs of the base and completely left them to his subordinates and other members of the Lee family. In recent years, he found that young Master Lee was a little more concerned about the base, but he didn't expect that he was so concerned about the base now. It was rare for him to leave the base for 2 years. At home, he had to check the training of the base members from time to time and even send training photos to him for inspection. Chapter 763. Fong Ling found that recently, when she was training every day, people around her kept glancing at her. It had been like this since she wore the new clothes that Han Jin brought her. She had never studied the difference between these uniforms, and they looked the same when they stood together, so why on earth were these people looking at her? The point was that when these people looked at her, their eyes were shining as if they had a special fondness for her clothes. She was a little puzzled and asked Han Jin after the training. Han Jin only replied, Maybe it's because your clothes are all new. They look newer than theirs." Just like that? Weren't the uniforms provided for free? As long as they were worn out, they could directly get another set? At that time, she also wanted to get a set, but because there was no size that she could wear, she had to wait for a few days. In the end, Han Jin suddenly sent her a few sets. She thought that it was specially made according to her size, and it was no different from others. Until Kay told her in private that the uniform she was wearing was of the same standard and quality as the one Boss Lee usually wore in the base. It was sandwiched with a protective layer that ordinary knives and guns couldn't easily penetrate, so people couldn't see the difference. However, after a long time of contact with Boss Lee, many people could see the difference. He also said that this kind of uniform could only be worn when going out to do dangerous tasks, and other newcomers and training members were not qualified to wear it. This time, Feng Ling didn't ask Han Jin anything. She vaguely felt that this kind of uniform was definitely not something that Han Jin, the deputy drill master of Team 1, could easily make the decision. It was no good to ask more. Anyway, there was no difference in wearing it, and she found that this uniform was indeed much stronger than the one she wore before. At least after half a month of continuous training, it was not worn or scratched at all. The quality was really good. In the evening, Feng Ling took the new cell phone that Han Jin bought for her. Of course, the money to buy the cell phone was the bonus for her ranking first in the previous special training assessments, which was about 30,000 yuan. She gave 3,000 yuan to Han Jin to buy a cell phone for her, and like other newcomers she was not allowed to leave the base at will. She fiddled with the cell phone and looked at the numbers saved by Han Jin. She didn't know what Han Jin was thinking. Why did he save Nanheng's number in the address book of her cell phone? But after thinking about it, she still clicked on the text message page. She didn't know how to use the old cell phone that Kay gave her in the past, and Kay taught her everything. Now she had learned it, but the first text message in her life was sent to Li Nanheng. Feng Ling, boss, are these uniforms specially made according to my size? Is the cost included in the base's account or is it your own money? How much is it? I will pay you back. She thought about how she still had more than 20,000 yuan in her hands. This money should be enough to pay back the debt. 5 minutes later she received a reply. Nanheng? It was a very cold and indifferent question mark. Looking at the words she typed, he should be able to guess who she was, but she sent a question mark instead. For the sake of her clothes and the fact that Boss Lee did not drive her out of the base and even gave her a chance to earn a bonus, Feng Ling patiently sent another message. I am Feng Ling. This time rank, Li Feng Ling. Nanheng got the special training ranking. Did you buy a new cell phone? Get out and do physical training. If I find that you don't sleep and send text messages at night, I will ask Han Jin to confiscate all your bonuses. Feng Ling, Boss Lee, are you a devil? It was rare for her to say thank you in her life, but this was the result? Feng Ling simply stopped replying. She threw the cell phone on the bed, changed her clothes, got up and went out. When she opened the door, she saw Han Jin waiting for her outside. The routine special training every night didn't miss a single night. It was easy to guess who gave the order before leaving. Otherwise, Han Jin had to train her alone at night after a tiring day. Feng Ling turned her wrist and said, "Let's go. Aren't we training physical strength and shooting today?" Han Jin raised his eyebrows. How is your cell phone? Not bad. Looking at the boy who was still calm and indifferent, Han Jin turned and walked out quietly. As he walked, he remembered that Boss Lee had specially called him during the day and asked him to buy a convenient cell phone for Feng Ling. He looked back at Feng Ling, who seemed to be unaware of his words. TSK, boss really put a lot of thought into this. If Feng Ling knew that he was now a piece of fat meat targeted by boss, he would probably escape from 11 base overnight. The Li family's villa. Nanheng waited for more than 10 minutes but did not receive any reply from Feng Ling. He glanced at the cell phone and then at the message box, which was still silent. He waited for a while but there was still no reply. The man stared at the cell phone gloomily, tapped the screen of the cell phone with his fingers, pressed the numbers one by one, and saved Feng Ling's new cell phone number. The Li family had been supported by a few brothers of the Li family in the past. In just a few decades, it had achieved an extraordinary status in the United States. And the Li family had always been ruled by men. From Li Nanheng's grandfather to several brothers and cousins with the same surname, the 4 elders of the Li family, regardless of rank or seniority, each had a certain prestige in the military area. In the Li family's villa, the elders didn't care much and usually drank tea to discuss Li Nanheng's marriage, the future development of 11 base, and the future direction of the Li family. Some time ago they mentioned the marriage to Li Nanheng, but he coldly and seriously refused. The elders were not in a hurry. While talking about Li Nanheng's instantly darkened face, they talked about the type of men that young people like nowadays and then talked about the past. Nanheng has not been in the base recently. Hasn't Ah Feng been temporarily sent to manage the base? What's the news from Ah Feng? Are the new blood in the base better than the old members when we founded the base? Nowadays, the newcomers haven't experienced the war decades ago and haven't participated in an actual battle. They can't understand what killing is at all. It can't be said that there is no talent, but it's really rare. I heard from Ah Feng that there is a young newcomer recently. He seems to be called Feng Ling. He is agile and his moves are so fast that people can hardly see him clearly. He has great potential. Yes, I've also heard about that Feng Ling. He is indeed young, but it is said that he ranked first in this special training assessment. I have seen the video recorded at the assessment site. His one move is indeed better than the other newcomers' 4 or 5 moves. His marksmanship is also very perfect. If he is trained well, he will be a good seedling. Chapter 764. It's really a coincidence. In the United States, it's rare to see people with the surname Feng. Speaking of the surname Feng, the second daughter of the Feng family who unfortunately died back then, if she was still alive she should be about 13 or 14 years old, right? Alas, it's a pity. When that little girl was 1 month old, I went to the Feng family to see her and held her. There aren't many children who can be so beautiful and adorable, but who would have thought that she was such an ill-fated child? If it weren't for the fact that the child's parents took the child out and their hands slipped on the cruise ship and the child fell into the sea, wouldn't that little girl be 13 or 14 years old now? At that time, the Feng family members desperately jumped into the sea to find the child and almost lost their lives. They finally rescued the adults, but there was no trace of the child. The child who couldn't even walk was gone. It was useless even if the daughter-in-law of the Feng family cried. Such a young child fell into the sea, and not even her body could be found. For many years, the daughter-in-law of the Feng family refused to have another child. When mentioning children, she would easily become mentally weak for a few days. She only had one child, Feng Mingzhu, who became the treasure of the Feng family. It was said that the name Feng Mingzhu was changed later. It meant that she missed her second daughter and prayed that God would pity her and return her to Jun Mingzhu. But it had been more than 10 years. If that child could really survive a miracle, she didn't know how she would live, but there was no such miracle in this world. In the vast sea, even an adult couldn't easily survive, let alone a child who was less than 1 year old. As soon as the elders mentioned the Feng family, they had endless topics to talk about. After all, the Li family and the Feng family had been friends for decades, and the Feng family was an overseas family with more than 100 years of history in New York. They were good at business and had a pivotal position in the Chinese community in the United States. Now they wanted the eldest daughter of the Feng family, who was already 18 years old, to marry Nanheng, and the Feng family agreed. Feng Mingzhu had seen Nanheng when she was a child and had an impression of him. It was said that she had long fallen in love with him, but their Nanheng obviously had no intention of accepting this marriage. The Feng family was invited to the Li family. Of course, the elders of the Li family were trying to matchmake the two young people. Seeing that Feng Mingzhu, who was now slim and graceful, followed her family into the door and politely called them grandpas with a sweet smile, the elders smiled so hard that their faces almost squeezed out of their faces. Young Master Li, the Feng family is here. No matter what, they are friends of our Li family. You should go to see them. Even if you are not interested in Miss Feng, don't mention about the marriage. Just take it as meeting them. The butler was talking upstairs. Nanheng returned to the Li family as the elders wanted, but he had no intention of having anything to do with the Feng family. Li family's home. Feng that Li of a Feng was that he Feng of family all. The Bi Li Feng family of Feng he Feng. He had to be respectful to these old men, but he also couldn't indulge their desire to dominate. He could play with them and show his filial piety, but he would rather spend the rest of his life alone in 11 base if he had to marry a woman he had never taken a liking to. No. The man said in a cold and indifferent tone and didn't even look up. He was not interested in the Feng family at all. The butler had no choice but to persuade him, but he still didn't look at him. Obviously, no matter what he said, Li Nanheng didn't want to listen. Besides, young Master Li had grown up with the help of these old men. The more difficult it was to deal with the old men, the more shrewd young Master Li was. It was really difficult to deal with him. If it weren't for the fact that young Master Li was filial to the elders, no one could make him go back to the Li family. Now it was hard enough for him to meet the Feng family. It was even easier for him to agree to marry Miss Feng. The butler had no choice but to ask for help. As soon as the door was closed, Han Jin called. Boss, I've confiscated all the bonuses in Feng Ling's hands. This boy is gnashing his teeth. He was obviously unhappy during the morning training this morning and glared at me several times. Hearing Han Jin's words, Nanheng glanced deeply at the text message prompt that popped up on his cell phone screen. It was a text message of transfer. Han Jin was smart enough to directly transfer the money to his account while confiscating Feng Ling's bonus. It was merely 20,000 yuan, but it was a huge sum of money to Feng Ling. She could imagine how painful it must have been for the little guy to hand over the money. Thinking of Feng Ling's expression when she was angry but obediently handed over the money, Nan Heng glanced at the text message again, and a smile that even he himself didn't notice flashed across the corner of his mouth. As soon as Nan Heng put down the phone, the door was suddenly kicked open. The eldest of the Li family's elders, who was also Nan Heng's biological grandfather, walked in quickly with a cane. Seeing Nan Heng, who was usually awe-inspiring in 11 base but pretended to be an idle young master when he came home and often pretended to be dead, he directly smashed the cane in his hand on his bed. Nan Heng didn't even lift his eyelids and just casually moved his leg to the side. The cane that smashed down fiercely fell on the bed and didn't hit his leg at all. Are you going down or not? The people of the Feng family are here. If you don't go down today, how can we face the Li family? The marriage agreement with the Feng family has been set as early as more than 10 years ago. Whether you like it or not, you must marry the daughter of the Feng family. Look at that girl Mingzhu, she has been beautiful, talented and virtuous since she was a child. If you don't like this kind of girl, what kind of girl can you like? Don't tell me that only a fairy descends to the world can enter your eyes. Nan Heng picked up the old man's cane and threw it back to him with one hand. When the old man caught the cane accurately but still glared at him with an ugly face, he opened his mouth and said in a lazy voice, "Don't the Feng family have 2 daughters? Did you guys agree on who I should marry in your agreement? If you insist on abiding by the agreement and I really don't want to marry her, there is a way to satisfy both sides. Why don't you marry their second daughter to me?" T. Grandfather Li's face instantly turned livid. The second daughter of the Feng family died before she was 1 year old. Do you want to marry their second daughter's cenotaph? Marrying a dead person is much quieter than marrying a troublemaker who pesters me. You, Li Nanheng no longer looked at the old man. His expression was cold and had no intention of giving in at all. If their second daughter is still alive, she doesn't seem to be at the age to get married this year. If you really want to talk about marriage, I don't mind waiting for another 4 or 5 years to marry her cenotaph. Not only will you fulfill your agreement, but it will also help me to live in peace. Chapter 765. The look on Grandfather Li's face changed again and again from green to white, and then he was so angry that he clenched his crutch tightly. It seemed that if Li Nanheng said one more word, he would beat him to death with his crutch. Marry a cenotaph? He really dared to say that. Nonsense. Feng Mingzhu is already downstairs. Even if you don't plan to marry her now, you should at least go and see her. No. This was Nanheng's final response to the marriage with the Feng family. As long as he had made a decision, even Grandfather Li couldn't change it. Hearing his few words and extremely cold tone, Grandfather Li also knew that he would never marry the eldest daughter of the Feng family. But the marriage with the Feng family was a top priority. Now the power of the Feng family in the United States had been involved in the political circle, and there was another sworn enemy also covetously eyeing the power of the Feng family. Any powerful party joining hands was definitely a threat. Now the Li family was like the sun in the sky, but if the Feng family married their sworn enemy, everything would be uncertain. Are you sure you won't marry Feng Mingzhu? Grandfather Li narrowed his eyes coldly and looked at him seriously. Li Nanheng's tone was cold. "Oh, not bad, boy. You've got guts. Remember what you said just now. We're going to marry the Feng family. Even if we have to build a cenotaph for you, you must marry one of the Feng family's daughters." Captain Li's face darkened. He turned around and walked out with his walking stick, slamming the door behind him. Nanheng didn't care. He yawned, lay on the bed casually, picked up his cell phone, and looked at the bank transfer message he had just received. The man raised the corner of his mouth, sighed with a smile and threw the cell phone aside. Time flew and a year and a half passed. Life in 11 base was still going on. In the past 2 years, Feng Ling had grown at least 7 or 8 centimeters taller. Although she still appeared excessively short among the group of men in the base, a 15-year-old girl who had already reached a height of 1.65 meters was really not considered short. Besides, she still had at least 2 or 3 more years of puberty. Early in the morning, Feng Ling heard the signal for morning exercise, got up to change clothes and was about to go to training, when she suddenly remembered that Han Jin assigned a task to her and Kay. Today she and Kay were going to leave the base to dismantle the mines in a jungle in Los Angeles. Feng Ling thought for a while and got up as usual. Kay came to knock on her door very early. When he entered the door, Feng Ling had already put on his clothes. Even though he had been trained in the base for a year and a half, the boy's skin was still unbelievably white. She wondered if Feng Ling had put on some powerful sunscreen during the special training under the scorching sun for the past 2 years. Otherwise, why didn't this boy show any signs of tanning after so long? And Feng Ling seemed to have not changed much except that he had grown a little taller and was stronger than when he first came. There was really a change. Maybe he looked better than a year and a half ago? At this age, people's facial features were more and more pleasing to the eye, whether it was men or women. Feng Ling, you have been living by yourself for more than a year. I really wonder if you have hidden some magical sunscreen in this place. After entering the door, Kay began to rummage around, opening drawers or cabinets, but after searching for a long time, there was no skincare products at all. Some of the brothers in the base who were allergic to UV at least had some men's skincare products, but they didn't expect that Feng Ling's skin was so soft and tender every day. Everyone thought that he paid attention to taking care of himself at such a young age, but he didn't even have a bottle of moisturizer. Kay was about to search the spare box under the bed, where there were the sanitary pads Feng Ling secretly bought every month. She could pretend to be a man at any time except for these special days of each month. Seeing that Kay's hand was about to touch the box, Feng Ling stretched out her foot and put it in front of his leg. Kay staggered and fell onto the bed and then jumped up. Shit. You're so fast now. I didn't even notice it. Feng Ling put on the black short-brimmed hat that she had to wear when she went out on a mission, reached out and gently patted Kay's cheek. Why do you think I can enter 11 base? I didn't receive special training at that time. It's just because of my speed that boss likes me. Now I've received special training for so long. If I'm still the same as before, I've been trained in vain, haven't I? Kay was stunned when he was patted on the face, mainly because Feng Ling's hand was much softer than his. It was so soft, tender, and white that it was easy for him to have an illusion. More importantly, Feng Ling was really too handsome at a close look. His androgynous facial features and his cold smile made it hard for people to see what he was really thinking. Besides, when they were together, they basically went out on a mission or training, and all of them were training movements related to physical fitness that were close to violence. Suddenly, he was patted on the face gently and even as if he was flirting with him. Kay took 2 deep breaths. For a moment, he forgot where he had turned after coming in and suddenly took a big step back. No. He must keep a distance from Feng Ling in the future. *CK, he had no choice but to maintain a distance. Earlier, he had only been slapped on the face and smelled the shower gel on Feng Ling's body. This was the same smell that he could smell on other men, but he actually felt his lower abdomen surging with desire. Was it because there were too many men in this base and his sexual orientation was not normal? No. After he left the base, he would sleep with women, have children, and live to the peak of a man's life. He must not be turned gay by Feng Ling. The jungle where the landmines needed to be dismantled was not far from 11 base. This was Feng Ling's 3rd mission in 11 base in nearly 2 years. The first 2 missions were very simple. They were all to assist the Los Angeles police in arresting criminals. This time, Feng Ling and Kay were sent alone. On the one hand, Feng Ling had a clear sense of direction in the jungle, and she also needed such experience. On the other hand, Kay was very good at searching for dangerous electronic items, so it was convenient for him to find the landmines buried underground. It was not the first time that the 2 of them had cooperated, so the base was very confident in them. After arriving at the mission area, it only took the 2 of them half a day to find all the buried landmines in the area and successfully dismantle them. Chapter 766. It was a message from Bosley. It was a short message, dismantled successfully? Although Bosley hadn't been at the base for more than a year, every mission in the base, big or small, must have been reported to him, so he must know everything big or small. Feng Ling only glanced at the 4 words. She was in a good mood because she had just succeeded and the mission was half a day shorter than planned. She raised her eyes to look at Kay and asked him to open the fireproof bag. Then she took a photo of Kay and the fireproof bag in his hand and sent it directly to Nanhang. This was a perfect response to the success of the mission. The Lee's building was the business shell of the Lee family in addition to the military base. The Lee family was also one of the leading Chinese business groups in the world. The man stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the large office of the Lee's building, glanced at the photo sent to him on his cell phone, and his fingers paused on the screen. In the photo, Kay, whose face was dirty because of running around in the jungle, was smiling brightly at the camera. The fireproof bag in Kay's hand contained all the waste mines and bombs that had been successfully dismantled. The man's indifferent face instantly darkened. Feng Ling had been on 3 missions in the past year, and Kay had been with her all the time. This time she even sent Kay to go with her. Looking at the brightly smiling face in the photo, Nan Heng's reply to the message seemed to be laced with a trace of coldness. What I want is the result of the successful dismantling, not the photo. Is this how you assign tasks? Who taught you this? Feng Ling looked at Boss Li's message and didn't feel that she had done anything wrong. She directly replied, I thought Boss could understand that we completed the mission in half of the prescribed time by looking at the photo, not just passing the test. Passing the test? If Feng Ling hadn't passed the test when she first entered the base, he wouldn't have agreed to let her stay in the base. Was she proud of completing the mission in half of the prescribed time? Or was she happy to complete the mission with Kay? Nan Heng clenched his cell phone hard, and a cold gleam of displeasure flashed across his eyes. The secretary who had just walked in saw young Master Li's expression and immediately swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Young Master Li was forced to come back to manage the Li's company. In the past year or so, everyone knew that young Master Li's temper was very difficult to deal with. Most people didn't even have the ability to enter his office safely. Recently they finally understood young Master Li's temper and their work was a little easier, but why did young Master Li's eyes? The secretary trembled as she put the documents in her hands on the desk. After briefly explaining the contents of the afternoon meeting, she quickly left, not daring to stay a moment longer. Li Nanhing put down his phone, turned back to his desk, picked up the documents on the table and glanced at the time. Half an hour later, before going to the conference room, Nanhing made a call to Han Jin. The base needs to reorganize the candidates for future missions. Mission partners can't appear more than 3 times. Every member needs to cooperate with each other and get used to each other. When it's time to replace them, just replace them. Han Jin didn't understand what was wrong with Boss all of a sudden, but his tone sounded like it was filled with ice. He hurriedly replied, Oh, okay, I'll tell them later. It had been 2.5 years since Nanheng left 11 base. At that time, the elders of the Li family promised that he would only come back for 2 years, but they kept procrastinating and delayed it for another half a year. The elders claimed that they were ill and didn't care about the big and small matters of the company and the base. Almost all the matters of the company and the base were handed over to Nanheng. As a result, Nanheng's temper became colder and colder, and everyone in the company felt insecure. In the business conference room, the anger was as low as ever. The people of the finance department trembled as they reported this year's profit percentage, for fear that if young Master Li was dissatisfied, he would look at them with eyes as deep as ice and snow pools. Young Master Li, this is the comparison of this year's data and profit. It's higher than last year's. The people of the finance department braced themselves to finish the report and finally sat down. Life was really difficult. Obviously, the reported data was relatively higher than last year's, which should be something to be happy about, but every time this kind of report was made, people tremble as if they were afraid that they would lose their heads in the conference room. This young master of the Li family was really not a person to be trifled with, nor was he the approachable type. He would definitely make people tremble with just a look from him. Fortunately, young Master Li didn't seem to be completely focused on the meeting today. It seemed that he had something to do. He had been playing with the black cell phone in his hand and looking at the direction of the electronic data displayed on the PowerPoint in front of him indifferently. It wasn't until the people of the finance department sat down that Nanheng responded lightly, "Well, not bad." Not bad? This was the only thing that young Master Li had said in the more than 2 years since he took over the company. Nanheng didn't listen carefully. Anyway, the company's affairs had been very stable. As long as they didn't go in the wrong direction, everything would develop well. Besides, there was a huge force behind the Li family. Many partners couldn't wait to cooperate with the Li family and couldn't wait to have cooperation projects for decades. There was no need to spend too much effort to win over any partners. He was more concerned about the time. 2 hours ago, Han Jin called and said that 3 days later, the base would officially carry out the pre-training assessment for sniper rifles. On the list, Feng Ling, Kay and others had been selected. In the end, only 5 people were really qualified to receive long-range sniper training, but there were currently 30 people on the list. At present, it seemed that Feng Ling and Kay were very popular and had good potential. The others were also good, so the results of the assessment could only be said to be unknown. This news made Nanheng even more determined to return to 11 base. He could hand over the Li family's company to anyone, but 11 base was his foundation, and it was the place that he really couldn't easily give up. Han Jin often talked about Feng Ling's training results in the past 2 years on the phone. Now his physical fitness had already reached the passing line, and many members who were taller and more powerful than Feng Ling might not be able to defeat this guy. After all, now Feng Ling was one of the newcomers in the same batch who had all reached excellent results in terms of skills, speed, and physical fitness. He took the risk to accept Feng Ling, and he was indeed not disappointed. Thinking of this, the corners of Nanheng's mouth rose slightly, revealing a slight smile. Several senior executives in the meeting room were instantly stunned, staring at young Master Li's seemingly smiling face. Chapter 767. At night. The Li family's villa. Have you decided? Or you refuse to stay in the company? I've already sent someone to help you manage 11 base. Now you don't have to go back to the base to worry about labor. It's more suitable for you to stay in the company and guard this business blueprint. Although 11 base is the foundation of our Li family, we often go through fire and water. You are the only child in the entire Li family. Grandfather Li looked back at Li Nanheng, who was about to leave. Li Nanheng casually put one hand on the back of the sofa and said with a faint smile, "You know I am the only heir of the Li family. When I was less than 5 years old, you threw me into 11 base to receive training from an early age. Now I have taken over this foundation, but now you remember that I am the only heir. Are you afraid that I will go through fire and water, so you want to throw me into the business circle of the Li family to eat human blood? Old master, aren't you being too whimsical? You're using one grandson as 2 people? If you wanted me to take over the company, you shouldn't have put me into 11 base. Now that I have entered the base, do you think it's possible to let me out?" Grandfather Li's face was cold. "If your parents hadn't left early, I would certainly let them have another child, but now you are the only one. I have to consider whether the Li family will have a descendant or not. Now 11 base is becoming more and more powerful. Maybe one day it will be targeted by the higher-ups because it has too much power. Although we are now in the United States, there have been too many such examples since ancient times, whether in China or the West. Military power is also military power. I don't want you to be in danger." Li Nanheng's smile was very cold. "Danger? Isn't the business circle dangerous? It's no different from 11 base, but the hostility between people is more subtle. One is fatal and the other kills without spilling blood. There is no place that is really safe." "I still say the same thing. You are all old, but you are still healthy. Besides, I have 2 cousins. Who says women can't take over the company? I think those 2 cousins have master's degrees in business school, but the Li family only allows them to be managers of a few subsidiaries. This is too much of a waste." Nanheng said indifferently, "In my opinion, why don't I return to the base and hand the company over to my 2 cousins? If they can't make the company better within 3 years, we'll consider other methods." Seeing that Grandfather Li seemed to be very repulsed by the decision of a woman to take over the company, Li Nanheng sneered and directly blocked Grandfather Li's rebuttal. "You only have one choice. I will never take over the company. Either you hand it over to an outsider. After all, there are many outstanding vice presidents and newcomers in the company, or you hand it over to your 2 cousins. After all, they are members of the Li family, aren't they?" With that, Nanheng took a look at the time. Without saying anything more, he got up and left. When he walked to the door, he said coldly, "I was thrown into 11 base by you since I was a child. My entertainment since childhood is those muddy targets and bullets. How can I be interested in the business circle? A person can't be divided into 2 halves. You created a person, but now you want to break him into another person. Isn't that whimsical?" "You." Old Master Li instantly turned to look at him with a livid face. Nanheng didn't say another word. He glanced at Old Master Li indifferently and left. As soon as Nanheng returned to the base, he saw that Han Jin was training people on the training ground in the middle. A group of newcomers who had been in the base for more than 2 years and nearly 3 years had now become like steel. Compared with those years ago, they had indeed made a lot of progress. They were all strong and wore uniform black uniforms. Standing in several rows, their pure manliness was vividly displayed at this moment. This was completely different from the Li family's company. But as soon as Nanheng stepped in, he felt that it was much easier to breathe. The tall black Hummer stopped in the parking lot outside the training ground. Nanheng didn't go to inform others but just watched the members who were training in the distance. Han Jin had just seen Nanheng return to the base and knew yesterday that boss would come back today. Seeing that boss didn't intend to come over, he didn't stop but continued to sternly order the members of Team 1 to do training. Nanheng leaned against the iron fence outside the training field leisurely with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. He didn't look like a serious person at all. Han Jin looked at him from a distance, but he felt relieved in his heart. Looking at Boss Li's state, it should be that his family affairs had been solved. He and several other instructors in the base had been worried that Boss Lee would be detained by the elders of the Lee family and not allowed to return to the base, but now it seemed that it was all right. On the other side, Feng Ling went out on a mission alone this time because it was not a big or small mission. She could go out alone. It was an underground drug trafficking gang in Los Angeles. Because the boss of this gang liked to buy Tibetan Mastiffs from China, he specially bought more than a dozen from China. These fierce and brutal Tibetan Mastiffs could be sold for more than $200,000, which was not a large amount, but this gang would immediately carry out the transaction in an abandoned warehouse somewhere on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Feng Ling disguised herself as the feeder and driver of those Tibetan Mastiffs, knocked out the real driver in the car, and drove directly to the abandoned warehouse. After driving the car to the place, Feng Ling picked up the key in the car and got out. She turned around to open the huge metal box behind the train. When she opened it, the stench inside came out. Those Tibetan Mastiffs had been transported on the road for many days, and the smell of all kinds of food and feces of the Tibetan Mastiffs filled her nose. Feng Ling was not affected at all. There was a very clear metal fence in the metal box, but because she was not the real feeder of these Tibetan Mastiffs, the tall and mighty Tibetan Mastiffs inside turned back and barked at her. In order not to arouse the suspicion of those people, she must successfully lure these Tibetan Mastiffs into the abandoned warehouse. If they were left in the car and they kept barking at her, it would definitely arouse suspicion. She suddenly took out a little medicine from the interlayer of her pocket, which was specially made by the Research Institute inside 11 Base, which was specially designed for this kind of mission related to animals and large animals. It could make some animals that could not cooperate temporarily lose their attack power. In the distance, the black Hummer had been parked there for a long time. Nan Heng glanced at Feng Ling's outfit, got out of the car and walked over. When Feng Ling heard his footsteps, she suddenly turned back, only to see that Feng Ling had specially changed her makeup. Nan Heng's voice was indifferent. "This is the way you came up with to deal with those people? Disguise yourself as an ugly feeder?" That. Chapter 768. Feng Ling didn't expect it to be Nan Heng. She hadn't seen him for nearly 3 years. She thought he wouldn't return to the base in the next few years, but she didn't expect that he would appear when she was on a mission. Feng Ling turned back and continued to look at the Tibetan Mastiffs that kept barking at her. "Are they ugly?" As she spoke, she ground the medicine into powder and sprinkled it into the big box of food that had been messed up by the dogs. Anyway, she was used to Nan Heng's sharp tongue and didn't mind it at all. Nan Heng walked over and saw that Feng Ling quickly sprinkled the powder into the food. She was so fast that the Tibetan Mastiffs couldn't catch up with her when they wanted to bite his hand. Several Tibetan Mastiffs hit their heads heavily on the railing and cried out in pain. After the powder was sprinkled, Feng Ling saw that there was still more than an hour before the group of people arrived. She casually took off the hat on her head and turned to look at Nan Heng. "Don't you look good? How handsome you are." Nan Heng looked at the boy in front of him. He had grown a lot taller than when he left. He should be 16 years old, almost 17 years old. Now he was at least 1.68 meters tall, but compared with him who was nearly 1.9 meters tall, he was still at least a head shorter. His figure was no longer as thin as when he first entered the base, but he didn't look as strong as others. In his eyes he was still very thin. Although he had been in the base for 2 or 3 years, his skin was still as white as before. However, this face, he didn't know where he got a big black mask from. On the other side there were 2 lifelike fake scars. His eyelids were also carefully disguised, and he didn't know what method he used to make them look swollen. He couldn't be uglier. How could he have the nerve to say he was handsome? Nan Heng decisively turned his head away and no longer looked at her face carefully, afraid that he would have a *king nightmare on the first night he returned to the base. Feng Ling's task this time was not difficult. If it was extremely difficult, she would definitely send someone to help. This was a mission assigned to her by the base, and it was also a kind of training. Nan Heng observed the surrounding environment. Before coming, he had also investigated the situation of the group of people. Knowing that Feng Ling could handle it alone, he did not intervene and only warned, "Be careful. Don't get hurt. If you are bitten by a dog and get rabies, you don't have to go back to this base anymore." Then he returned to the black Hummer not far away and drove the car to another place in the blink of an eye, so as not to be discovered by the group of people. Feng Ling was speechless. If he told her to be careful, then be careful. Why did he have to mention rabies? Although the dogs were awake, it was obvious that their barking had weakened a lot. Not long after, half of them were lying on the ground drinking water from the basins, while the other half were still barking. However, their voices were not as loud as before, which made them look normal. No one would suspect that she was not a feeder, which would cause the group of people to worry. Just when Feng Ling was about to move the huge cage down from the back of the car and move it into the warehouse, she put on a heavy pair of gloves and protective gear that could effectively prevent biting, and the protective gear perfectly covered half of her face. When she reached out to touch the cage, several Tibetan mastiffs who were still a little energetic came over to bite her. Feng Ling only took a glance and found that although these mastiffs looked fierce, they did not bite hard. The medicine was really useful. With the gloves and protective gear, she safely moved the cage down and then moved it into the abandoned warehouse little by little. At this time, a stone was suddenly thrown over from a distance. Feng Ling paused and looked back, only to see that Kay had also come. The tall and thin young man had a blade of grass in his mouth and was playing with another stone in his hand. He walked over leisurely. Seeing that Feng Ling had the strength to move such a large cage and so many giant dogs into the warehouse, he immediately raised his eyebrows. "I thought you probably couldn't move so many Tibetan mastiffs alone, so I wanted to come and help you. I didn't expect that you can do it now. No wonder you are in the top 10 of this year's American Close Combat Competition. Although you are small and thin, your physical strength is really not in vain." Feng Ling just glanced at him and continued to busy herself. After moving the cage to a position inside that looked pleasing to the eye, she took off the gloves and protective gear and said lightly, "I am in the top 10 this year, and I will be the champion in the next close combat competition." Kay directly spat out the blade of grass in his mouth and said with a smile, "Are you sure? The next competition is only 2 or 3 years later. How old will you be then? 18 or 19 years old?" In the past few decades, none of the American close combat champions have been younger than 30 years old. Each and every one of them is a muscular fighter who has trained for at least 20 years. You're so skinny and frail. When it comes to the finals, they can send you to Siberia with just one punch. Feng Ling glanced at him lightly. "Does it have anything to do with age? Why not? Didn't you say last time that in the annual training assessment of 11 base, no one under the age of 18 won the first place, and no one weighed less than 140 kilograms? Who was the first place in the end?" Feng Ling's words were reasonable. After all, Feng Ling had been the first in the assessment for 2 years in a row. The other members who looked taller and stronger than her had been defeated by her again and again. Not only had Feng Ling's physical strength passed the test, but she was also skilled and fast. No other member could beat her. Feng Ling's body condition had improved a lot. Now, with her skills and speed, no other member could beat her. Besides, Feng Ling was not even 17 years old yet. Kay touched his nose awkwardly and reached out to help her. While helping her teach the Tibetan mastiffs in the cage that were still barking wildly, he said, "Let me tell you, our boss Lee will return to the base in 2 days. Do you know what it means to be the tallest tree in the forest? Boss has always been against you. Back then, boss always targeted you. Now you must restrain yourself. If you show off too much, he might torture you again. Show some weakness occasionally. You can be arrogant in front of us brothers, but don't be too presumptuous in front of boss." Besides, Boss Lee said that he would come back in 2 years, but it has been almost 3 years. Obviously, those old men of the Lee family are unwilling to let him go. Now that he has finally come back, I don't know how angry he is. You must be careful. Don't get yourself into trouble. Before Kay finished speaking, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the person in front of the abandoned warehouse out of the corner of his eye. He paused and suddenly turned his eyes to look at the person carefully. In an instant he was completely shocked. Boss? Why did Boss Lee come here?" Chapter 769. Nanhing didn't even look at him and walked in with an indifferent expression. The black uniform he wore was made of the same material as Feng Ling's, but because he was tall and had long legs, he looked straight and strong, which made him look even more noble. Feng Ling also stopped and turned back to look at him. The person who just said that he would let her do the task by herself suddenly appeared here. What did he mean? Kay still wanted to say something, but seeing that boss didn't want to talk to him at all, he scratched his hair and said very consciously, 2 people at most are enough. If there are too many people, those people will be suspicious when they come over. So, I'd better leave first, Feng Ling said. Boss is obviously here to monitor our mission. You won't help us. You should be the one to stay. The meaning of her words was obvious. The person who should leave was this cold and arrogant man in front of her. However, Nanheng stood there as if there was no one else. His eyes swept over Kay inch by inch, and finally he frowned. Don't you have your own task to do? Kay was stunned. Yes, Feng Ling and I have our own tasks today, but I finished my task in advance in the morning. Anyway, I have nothing to do and it's on the way, so I came to help him. Nan Heng glanced at Kay's and Feng Ling's hands on the cage at the same time. Feng Ling had pushed Kay's hand away because she thought he was in the way. He could tell that they were very familiar with each other. Kay, are you also in Team 1 now? As soon as this question came out, Kay's expression instantly became much more solemn, and he said with some pride in his eyes, "Boss, yes, I have now entered the training camp of Team 1 with my own efforts, and I will participate in the sniper selection assessment with Feng Ling. I won't let you down, boss." It was fine to participate in the sniper selection assessment, but he had to add the words with Feng Ling. Nan Heng stood there and narrowed his eyes dangerously. Kay had a hunch that boss was about to stare at him coldly, so he ignored what Feng Ling said just now, found an excuse to go back to the base first and slipped away. Only Feng Ling and Nan Heng were left in the warehouse. Feng Ling didn't think it was a big deal. Anyway, she could solve it by herself. Whether it was boss or Kay here, it was good enough that she didn't think they were a hindrance. She turned around and continued with her work. At the same time, she glanced at the time and said, "Boss, they will be here in 20 minutes. Are you going to help or stand on the side and supervise? If you need help, please change out of your combat uniform. If you're here to supervise the work, please go back to the car and wait." The man was no longer as noble and indifferent as he was in front of the Li family and other people. He only glanced at her. "What? Do you think I'm a hindrance?" Feng Ling paused and turned back to glance at him. Her gaze was clearly saying, "You're quite self-aware." Nan Heng sneered and didn't argue with her. He turned around and walked out, returning to his car. Feng Ling, sure enough, she was the boss. She drove her helper away and went back to the car to enjoy herself. 20 minutes later, the group of people drove over in several cars and a big train, intending to take these Tibetan Mastiffs away. Feng Ling disguised herself well and followed this group of people to their hiding place. When she moved the Tibetan Mastiffs out of their car, the time of the medicine was almost up. Those quiet and normal Tibetan Mastiffs suddenly kept barking at the people around them. When the group of people impatiently asked her to control these dogs to quiet down, Feng Ling knew that her identity might be exposed at any time, so she no longer concealed herself and directly launched an active attack on the person standing nearest to her. First, she grabbed the gun, and then she kicked away the person who was quick to come over to help. After grabbing 2 guns in her hand, 4 or 5 people had fallen in front of her in less than 10 seconds. This group of people was not as well trained as the American Mafia, but there were more people and they were better at solving problems with brute force, which was a piece of cake for Feng Ling. When the people here heard the noise and rushed out with weapons, Feng Ling jumped onto the cage containing the Tibetan Mastiffs, opened the cage and released all the Tibetan Mastiffs inside. The medicine had worn off, and the giant dogs inside rushed out like crazy beasts, biting anyone they saw. However, Feng Ling jumped to a high place first, so the people below who hadn't had time to escape became the prey in the eyes of the Tibetan Mastiffs. In just a few minutes the scene was chaotic. Feng Ling took the opportunity to sneak in and shot the boss and several other key members of the gang several times. However, in order to ensure that the police could successfully arrest them and bring them to the police station to record their statements, she shot accurately and disabled these people's hands and feet, so that they couldn't escape in a short time, but she didn't kill them for the time being. Mission accomplished, Feng Ling quickly left. However, just as she was about to drive away with the empty truck, a man whose leg was bitten by the Tibetan Mastiffs suddenly rushed out from inside. The man desperately raised his gun and shot at the tires of her truck. When the truck suddenly stopped because the tires were burst, Feng Ling suddenly looked at the man's gun with alarm. He was going to burst her gas tank. If the gas tank was ignited, the truck would also spontaneously combust. If the gas tank was more than 2/3 full, it was likely to cause an instant explosion. Just as Feng Ling decisively opened the door and was about to jump out, another man rushed out and pointed his gun at her. Chapter 770. The tires of the car Feng Ling was driving had burst and could not be driven anymore. After a moment of silence, she got out of the car and walked toward Nan Heng. "Boss, the car broke down. This is the wilderness and it's far from the base. Can you give me a ride?" Feng Ling didn't feel scared at all because she was almost killed by the 2 men just now. The smile in her eyes was clear and bright, and because she found that Boss Li seemed to hide a lot of his true nature, she suddenly felt that he was not so annoying. Nan Heng glanced at her indifferently. "Didn't you say you could handle it by yourself? What happened just now?" Feng Ling smiled calmly. "The only mistake was that I didn't know how much fuel was left in the fuel tank of this car. After all, this car was driven by them. I didn't check the fuel tank so I couldn't be sure whether it would explode when it was shot. I'll pay attention next time. Details determine success or failure. Your negligence may be the cause of your death. I'll remember, boss. Feng Ling looked sincere. Can you take me back to the base now? Nan Heng glanced at her indifferently and didn't waste any more time talking to her. He said coldly, get in the car. Nan Heng drove Feng Ling back to the base, and the brothers in the base saw Feng Ling get out of Boss Li's car. Boss Li was the driver. After getting out of the car, Feng Ling rushed to the training camp of Team 1. This kind of treatment was the only one in the entire base, right? Usually when Boss went out, the driver drove and Boss sat in the back, but now Boss Li drove and Feng Ling sat next to him. Shit. In the evening, because Nan Heng had just returned to the base, he had to go to Ah Feng's place to solve and hand over many affairs that he hadn't taken over in the past 2 years. Several drill masters were also in the base's conference room at the same time. After the handover, they sat down to discuss the upcoming long-range sniper training. It was getting dark and it was dinner time before the meeting finally ended. Boss, after reading the list of long-range sniper trainees, do you have any thoughts? There are also some people with good qualifications in the base. I'm not particularly satisfied with a few people on this list, but they performed exceptionally well in the assessment. There are only a few people on the list and it's not easy for me to filter them. Do you think there are any people who need to be filtered again? Han Jin walked to Nan Heng's side and looked in the direction of the training ground as he spoke. By the way, although Feng Ling has always been the first in the training and assessment in the past 2 years, and many people are convinced of his skills, there are still a few people who are not very convinced. After all, Feng Ling does look much weaker than others, so there are a lot of complaints in private that he was nominated as the first person on the sniper training list, but most of these complaints are from other teams. The members of Team 1 are very kind and friendly to Feng Ling, Nan Heng said lightly. If they are not convinced, let them fight. Men should solve their problems, especially in a place like 11 Base. If you can use your fists, don't use your mouth. Why are you talking behind my back? Han Jin smiled. If they can beat Feng Ling, do they need to complain behind her back? It's just because they can't beat him and are not convinced. Nan Heng was indifferent. I didn't expect that there are so many useless people in our place. We should kick such people out as soon as possible. Just as the two passed by the training camp of Team 2, they heard two people talking from a distance. Have you found that the guy named Feng Ling in Team 1 is becoming more and more arrogant? Usually when we meet in the base and say hello, he just looks up at us and doesn't even say a word. We are all men. Don't pretend to be cold. He is not just pretending. I've seen that he didn't abide by the rules in several written tests and assessments. After finishing the first test, he turned around and left. He didn't respect other members at all. It's obvious that no one is his opponent, so he doesn't even bother to look at them. Hey, just now Feng Ling came back directly in Boss Li's car. What the hell is this treatment? How can he be picked up by Boss personally for a small task? What kind of backdoor did he get? I think it's probably because he looks too much like a girl. Boss has been with men for a long time, so it's inevitable that he is fascinated by men. Haha. That guy's skin is so soft and tender. Not to mention Boss, if it weren't for the fact that he is so good at fighting, even I would want to go up and touch his face. It's said that one can't pass the barrier of a beauty. Our boss may not pass the barrier of a beauty. All of a sudden, no one knew what was going on. It was just summer and the sun was scorching at more than 30 degrees every day, but the surrounding air seemed to freeze in an instant. Those members of Team 2 looked up at the training camp gate and instantly saw the fascinated Boss Li. That grave and stern face was covered with frost that had never been seen before. Boss? Not only was Nan Heng's face cold, but his voice was also terrifyingly low and cold, and he said word by word, which made people's hearts tremble. Repeat what you just said to me. Don't miss a word. If you miss a word, the evening training time will be directly increased by 3 days. If you miss a word, the training time will be doubled. Boss, we're just joking, ha. The member of Team 2 standing closest to Nan Heng hurriedly got up and laughed. Feng Ling is the youngest in our team. Everyone treats him as a younger brother and likes to joke with him. Sometimes men joke like this. Don't speak properly. We'll pay attention to it in the future. Nan Heng suddenly laughed, then walked over and pulled the second person over with one hand. When the other person didn't dare to resist, he kicked him to the ground, stepped on his back and said in a voice that could freeze people to death, "Who do you think you are? You can't even enter the training assessment ranking. How can you expect the person who has been the first in the training assessment for 2 consecutive years to watch you on the training field?" Boss. The person who was stepped on the ground looked up at Han Jin behind Nan Heng with a frightened face, and said as if asking for help, "Drill Master Han, please help me explain." "I didn't mean that. We were really just talking casually. It was just a joke." Han Jin touched his forehead. What kind of joke was this? Why did they have to make trouble for Boss Li? Everyone in the base could see that although Boss was particularly against Feng Ling, he also attached great importance to her. Not to mention whether he had other thoughts about Feng Ling or not, Feng Ling's excellent martial arts skills and performance in the past 2 or 3 years were enough to suppress them. Who gave them the courage to talk nonsense here? "Boss, we're just not convinced that Feng Ling was selected as a sniper." The person lying on the ground explained with some difficulty and wanted to take this opportunity to accuse Ah Feng and other drill masters of the base of favoritism. However, Nan Heng stepped on the man and casually took out a cigarette to light. He narrowed his eyes and lowered his waist. As he puffed out white smoke at the man on the ground, he said coldly, "Do you want to know who was the first to allow Feng Ling to participate in the sniper assessment?" Chapter 771. The man on the ground froze for a moment, and then suddenly heard a cold voice behind him. "It's me." With that, Nan Heng withdrew his foot from the man's back and turned away without any warmth on his face. The man on the ground was still lying stiffly on the ground, as if he had been petrified. The other people who had joined in the uproar also didn't dare to say a word. Everyone thought that Feng Ling took advantage of Boss Li's absence to build a good relationship with several drill masters in the base, so he was given special treatment. After all, in the past 2.5 years, Boss Li was not in the base at all, and the matter of the sniper trainees was only mentioned during the period when Boss Li was absent. No one would have thought that Boss actually appointed Feng Ling before he left. Without Boss Li saying a word, the man lying on the ground knew that he was finished and it would be difficult for him to continue to live in the base in the future. Seeing that Boss had left, Han Jin followed him out, looked back at the man on the ground and sighed. "Think about it. Although Feng Ling seems to be incompetent in all aspects in your eyes, in fact, whether it is marksmanship, close combat, missions, or ordinary daily training, he has done better than you. Hundreds of pairs of eyes in the base have watched him, and they all know what is going on. Do you have to discriminate against a very excellent person? Today you were heard by Boss. You are really unlucky." With that, he ignored the pale-faced man on the ground, turned around and quickly followed up. The members of the training camp all fell silent. Indeed, Feng Ling, whether in speed or in other aspects, was not necessarily comparable to them even if they practiced for 5 or 6 years, but it couldn't be said that they were bad. Could only be said that Feng Ling was too excellent. But Boss just heard them say a few words about Feng Ling, but he was so protective of him. This Feng Ling was probably going to be arrogant in the base in the future. Nan Heng walked forward expressionlessly, and his face was as cold as the snow on the top of a mountain. Han Jin hurriedly followed him. He and several other drill masters had also heard about what happened today from individual members of the base, so it was inevitable that there would still be such discussions. After all, Feng Ling did look younger than everyone else. But it seemed that all the benefits were on him. But the fact was that whoever was better was qualified. It was useless to be dissatisfied. At the base cafeteria, Feng Ling saw that Kay had also come to the cafeteria and asked him to sit down. He happened to be lining up inside, so she bought a meal for Kay. She walked back to the table with 2 plates and put one in front of Kay. "Here, eat it." "Thanks." Kay looked at him with a cheeky smile. "The day after tomorrow will be the long-range sniper trainee assessment. How about you? Are you confident?" Feng Ling picked up the cutlery and said with a smile, "Just take the test. Even if you're not confident, you still have to take the test, right? Tisk, it's boring talking to people like you. Can't you be more humorous? Take it easy." The 30 people on the list are all trembling with nervousness. These days they take time to go to the shooting training ground to practice their shooting accuracy. Even I went to practice several times before going to bed. You are very arrogant and never cram at the last minute, but every time, you have outstanding results. Do you know how many people in the base are secretly jealous of you? Feng Ling didn't think so. Are you jealous? Tisk, why would I be jealous? Although I'm not as fast as you, I'm still an excellent member of our team 1, okay? Do you think I've been practicing in the base for so many years for nothing? Don't forget that you are the first on the list and I'm the second. I'm not much worse than you. Kay said as he put a piece of meat in his mouth and chewed it, saying vaguely, "But this time Boss is back and will watch us take the test with his own eyes. I'm a little nervous." "Isn't there a drinking party arranged for Boss by the base tomorrow night? Why don't you drink more tomorrow night and get drunk until the test the day after tomorrow? Then you can relax." Do you think boss will allow me not to go to the morning exercise the day after tomorrow? Will you press boss to the ground and teach him a lesson when you are drunk? Anyway, people who drink too much are irrational. Even if he wants to argue, he can't be too calculative. Besides, tomorrow's drinking party is arranged because of his return, so you can blame all the drunkenness on him. Boss certainly can't find any reason to punish you, Feng Ling said with a smile. Obviously, she was encouraging Kay to teach Li Nanheng a lesson when he was drunk. Kay snorted. Forget it. I'm afraid it's boss himself who really wants to teach you a lesson when he is drunk. I think he can't wait to sleep with you when he is drunk. Feng Ling happened to see a member of Team 1 passing by and turned back to say hello. She didn't hear Kay's words clearly, so she turned to look at him and asked, "Sleep with what?" Kay coughed. "No, I just said it casually. If you don't hear me, forget it." Seeing that Feng Ling seemed to have no feelings for Boss Li, Kay put the meat in his mouth and continued to say vaguely in a low voice, "Feng Ling, do you like men or women?" Feng Ling's clean and elegant short hair was slightly blown by the wind outside the cafeteria window, and she looked like a clear young man. She glanced at Kay. "It depends on what kind of like. In terms of brotherly affection, I especially like you." Kay's face instantly turned red, and he coughed several times before he said with difficulty in a choked and painful voice, "I mean the kind of like emotional. After all, you're so delicate and tender, which makes men want to protect you. It's not too much to say that you like men. Anyway, this kind of thing is very common now. There are also 2 couples in our base. It's just that they're very vague, but everyone knows it." Feng Ling curved her lips. "How is his skin tender?" "He's just a little fairer. I can't do anything about it. If you insist on asking me about my sexual orientation, I definitely prefer beautiful girls. There are so many big sisters with big breasts and buttocks. If I don't like them, do you think I'll be interested in a boorish man?" Gee, in this case, this guy's sexual orientation was quite normal. It seemed that boss didn't have a chance. He could only have a bitter one-sided love. Chapter 772. Kay had long been used to eating the food on Feng Ling's plate, so he naturally picked it up and ate it. Feng Ling also looked at him with a smile. "You eat so much every day. Why don't you get fat?" In front of the canteen, a tall and straight figure that could attract all eyes had come in. In addition to the members who were having dinner in the base canteen, there were also several people who came in with Nanheng. Boss Li had been away for more than 2 years. Now that he finally came back, they couldn't see him in person. Today they finally met him here. Everyone looked in his direction, and the atmosphere in the entire canteen suddenly became much more serious and cautious. In this huge 11 base, those who could stand firm in the base all had their own abilities. Of course, everyone was proud of themselves, especially so many young men. Boss Li was probably the only one who could intimidate them and make them quiet down obediently. Men were born with coldness and nobility as well as arrogance. However, Han Jin, who was walking behind Nanheng, and Xiao Su, who had just followed up, could clearly feel the coldness coming from Boss Li, as if he could freeze them to death. Especially when he saw Feng Ling pass her drumstick to Kay, and Kay naturally picked it up and began to chew on it. He didn't know why Boss was so unhappy, but his gaze was so cold that it was almost frightening. Feng Ling hadn't noticed what was going on at the entrance of the base canteen, but she clearly felt that the atmosphere in the canteen had changed. She raised her eyes and saw that Kay's expression was stiff. It seemed that he didn't know whether to eat or spit out the half of the chicken leg in his mouth or not, and he looked stiffly in the direction of the door. Why did Boss come? Why did Boss suddenly come at this time? Boss had never come to the canteen before, but since Feng Ling appeared in the base, Boss seemed to come to the canteen more often. Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket, but his fingers gradually clenched into fists. However, seeing that there were too many people in the canteen, he gradually took a deep breath and said stiffly, "The base canteen is really the liveliest place in the entire 11 base." Han Jin didn't want to talk now and didn't want to touch the bomb in front of him. Xiao Su braced himself and said, "Yes, the food in our base is too good. Usually, when everyone comes to the cafeteria to eat, it is indeed very relaxing." Feng Ling turned back because of Kay's expression. When she saw Boss Li, she just nodded politely and turned her head back. Looking at Kay, who was holding a chicken leg in his mouth, she raised her eyebrows and asked, "Why are you in a daze? Is he stupid? Aren't you going to eat?" Kay silently put down the chicken drumstick in his mouth, indicating that he was the one standing in the center of the glacier just now. He felt like he couldn't eat this drumstick anymore. Boss's gaze was so scary. Nanheng walked over, glanced at the vegetarian dishes on Feng Ling's plate, and then at the fish and meat on Kay's plate as well as the half drumstick he just got for free. Move. The man's voice was cold and hard. Before Feng Ling understood what was going on, Kay had already moved aside and left the seat opposite Feng Ling to Boss Li. When Nan Heng sat down, Feng Ling blinked and then looked at Boss Li's face. He looked a little cold. Who was he angry with? Who was not afraid of death to offend him? Feng Ling sat at the dining table. As she ate the food on her plate, she casually raised her eyes to look at the man sitting opposite her. You're only eating so little? Isn't the food in the base's cafeteria a combination of meat and vegetables designed to balance your body fat and muscles? You're only eating these vegetarian dishes. I think you might as well quit the base and become a monk. Nan Heng glanced at the food she was eating and frowned. Call the person in charge of the cafeteria over. Feng Ling, I'm eating by myself. However, when the person in charge of the base's cafeteria came over and saw Boss Li's face, he immediately approached cautiously and said in a barely audible voice, Boss Li. Nan Heng glanced at him coldly. Is there something wrong with the meat dishes you made, or is there something wrong? The members of Team 1 don't seem to be very interested in the meat dishes here. The man sat there, his tall and straight back made people have to be cautious. The person in charge of the cafeteria wanted to say something, but the noble man in front of him had taken the plate in front of Feng Ling to the side. Feng Ling, who was still holding the tableware in her hand, suddenly had no plate in front of her. Tomorrow we'll change the dishes. The meat dishes are mainly chicken breast, beef and mutton. Don't be too greasy. In fact, it's not very greasy, but Feng Ling seems to eat very little meat. It's not the cafeteria's fault. If it's not very greasy, just make it not greasy at all. Fry, cook, roast anyway is fine, but no oil is allowed in meat dishes. Okay, then we'll adjust the amount of oil in the meat dishes tomorrow. The person in charge of the cafeteria nodded repeatedly. Although some people did complain that these fried chicken legs seemed to use too much oil, the people in the cafeteria had always insisted on their own style and did not make any special adjustments. They didn't expect that Boss would suddenly pay so much attention to this problem today. Redo it and serve a new dish within an hour. Everyone, the person in charge of the cafeteria, okay. You're the boss, you have the final say. Feng Ling was silent, put down the tableware and said directly, I'm almost done. How about I go back first? Sit down for me. Let's try the new dishes and see if they suit your taste. Everyone's faces were cold. Did he let Feng Ling decide on the new dishes? Boss, your attitude toward Feng Ling is really very suspicious. Boss, I'm already full. I can't eat any more. There's only so much food on the plate. You only ate a few mouthfuls in total, and the only chicken leg was given to Kay. How can you be full after a few mouthfuls? Are you eating cat food? Feng Ling, she was indeed not full. But Boss Li sat opposite her with a frozen expression, which really made her lose her appetite. Now she just wanted to quickly avoid him. An hour later, the person in charge of the cafeteria brought up the lighter meat dishes and carefully placed them on a clean plate. They looked clean, light, and somewhat sumptuous. He sent them to Feng Ling. Try it. Is it still greasy? Feng Ling was caught off guard. The moment she raised her face, she saw the man directly handed another clean tableware to her. Chapter 773. Nan Heng was looking at her. His eyes were as deep as an ancient well, indifferent and noble but indifferent and persistent. It seemed that if she was not satisfied with the new dishes, the canteen manager would continue to study new dishes. Otherwise he might lose his job in the base. Feng Ling was indifferent for a moment, looked at the expectation in the canteen manager's eyes, and lowered her head to eat. After eating a few mouthfuls, she put down the tableware and looked up, only to see that Nan Heng was still looking at her. How does it taste? It's delicious. Are you sure it's delicious? Yes. Then will you give the food on your plate to others to eat in the future? Feng Ling, Kay, everyone, Han Jin and Xiao Su stood silently on the side and had already marked Feng Ling as a person that must not be provoked. When did Boss treat others like this? Boss, Feng Ling doesn't eat much every night. In fact, he usually eats a lot in the morning and at noon. He said that eating too much at night is not good for digestion, especially meat dishes, so he eats less at night. I eat more, so he gave it to me. Kay's desire to survive told him that he must find a way to explain. He couldn't let Boss think that there was something fishy between him and Feng Ling, otherwise, he was afraid that his life would be ruined by Boss. Feng Ling didn't know what was wrong with her. Why did Li Nanheng target her like this? Anyway, in her eyes he was targeting her. However, Kay's explanation made Li Nanheng's eyes even more chilling. Kay immediately raised his hand and made a zipping motion over his mouth, meaning that he shut up. Nan Heng coldly withdrew his gaze, but the air around seemed to be frozen, so no one dared to say a word. They could only watch Feng Ling eat. In fact, if Boss was really not satisfied with the food in the canteen, he could ask other people in charge of the base to come and say something. There was no need for him to come in person, but now Boss not only came in person, but also watched her eat and waited for his evaluation. This feeling that his life and death was in the hands of Boss and Feng Ling caused the head of the cafeteria to gradually sweat. In the end, Feng Ling said, "It's indeed quite delicious. Although the taste is much lighter, the other ingredients taste very good. The fragrance is very rich and not greasy." Hearing this, the person in charge of the cafeteria let out a sigh of relief. Hearing this, Nanheng raised his eyebrows, but his eyes didn't change much. "Eat all this. If you're afraid that it's hard to digest at night, you can do 2 hours of special training at night. I'm sure you'll be able to digest all this food." Feng Ling. Because of Boss Li's return after 2.5 years, the base became lively again. Dinner parties were arranged, and even the old members of the base who rarely went out all year round went out with them. In order to thank Boss Li for his nurturing and to comfort Boss Li for all the hard work he had done in the 2 years since he took over the family business, everyone clamored that they would not leave until they were drunk. Feng Ling had been in the base for 2 or 3 years. As one of the best newcomers in the base, she was also pushed to attend the party. The place had been booked in a hotel near the base and the base would pay for it. They only needed to be responsible for being present and having a good time. When it was Feng Ling's turn to ask when she planned to go, Feng Ling hesitated. After all, everyone knew that after eating in the cafeteria last night, Boss Li directly took her by the collar to the training camp of Team 1 and gave her a 2-hour physical training class. Feng Ling's physical strength was already very good, but he still increased the strength again and again. Every time she was so tired that she lay on the ground. But she had to admit that only in this way could she break through the limits of her physical strength again and again and get better and better. But last night, Feng Ling was really a little exhausted. After sleeping for a night, she went back to pack up after morning exercise. She had planned to go to the shooting training ground in the afternoon to practice her aim. After all, tomorrow was the assessment, but today everyone was excitedly discussing the party in the evening. Then the problem was she wanted to sleep in the base while everyone went to the party. But everyone said she had to go. Should she go or not? Kay said, "If you don't go, this party will probably be over in less than 2 hours. Boss is not in the mood to drink at all. Everyone still hopes to get Boss drunk while he is happy. Especially if you are here, you will definitely be able to get him drunk." Feng Ling, why? Kay smiled wickedly. "You are still young. Some things can only be understood but not explained." Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him. Xiao Su and Han Jin also came to call her early and asked her to go with them in the evening. It was impossible for her to stay in the base and let her choose between running 50 laps or drinking and eating with them. Only a fool would run 50 laps. 1 lap of the base was 20,000 meters or more. 10 laps would be fatal. 50 laps was the ultimate punishment for the members who made mistakes in the base. After running it, they would basically be disabled for about a week. She had to take the assessment tomorrow, so of course she couldn't run. Finally, Feng Ling was persuaded. Xiao Su and Han Jin went out and said as they walked, "Do you think it's too troublesome for us? If Boss doesn't have that kind of idea about Feng Ling, won't it be too embarrassing for us to send him into his arms?" Nonsense. How old is Feng Ling? He will be 17 in a few months. If he sends him to Boss, he will at most have a drink with him. What else can he do? Who can say what he thinks? The point is that we are too blatant. Whatever, as long as Boss is happy. It's not the end of the year yet. When Feng Ling turns 18, I think it's better to strip him clean and send him to Boss's bed. Xiao Su said as he looked around sneakily, only to suddenly see Nanheng standing in front of the training camp. In an instant, all the hair on his body stood on end. "Boss?" Nanheng looked at him coldly. "Who do you want to send to my bed?" Han Jin paused, suddenly clutched his stomach and cried out in pain. He shook off Xiao Su and turned to run straight to the public toilet of the base. Xiao Su stood there like a stone pillar. He first turned pale with fright and then his scalp went numb. "Ah, boss, you heard wrong. I mean, we go out to drink tonight. If anyone is really drunk, he may not be able to get up in bed." Nanheng was expressionless. Xiao Su suddenly thought for a while, looked back at the room where Feng Ling lived not far away, and then looked at the man in front of him. "Boss, what are you doing here at this time?" Nanheng squinted at him. "Do I need to explain to you?" Chapter 774. But boss, I've asked for you just now. Feng Ling will also go. Xiao Su took credit for himself with a straight face. Nanheng paused and sneered. She can go. What does it have to do with me? Then why did you come to Feng Ling's place? When she goes, don't get too close to the members of Team 1. Just let her stay with the others. I'm going to have a drinking competition with a large group of people from Team 1. Without your brilliance, I can experience the most handsome surf singing. I don't accept any objections. Anyway, Han Jin had slipped away, so Xiao Su simply boasted shamelessly. However, in the end, Xiao Su didn't go inside. After learning that Feng Ling would go, Nanheng didn't go inside, but in the evening he obviously didn't intend to let Xiao Su mix with Team 1 to have a drinking competition. The location was chosen by several drill masters in the base. Only the people in the base knew that there was such a high-end hotel near 11 base. The investor of this hotel must have something to do with the Li family. Obviously, it was suicidal to open such a luxurious hotel in such a suburban location, and the customer flow wouldn't be large at all, but the investor clearly wanted to please the Li family and 11 base, so this hotel existed. Xiao Su sighed along the way. Didn't you agree to let me go with Team 1 to have a drinking competition alone? Boss, why did you make an appointment with Han Jin to have a few drinks in the evening? You said that all the teams are the same. Why do you still insist on having a drink with Team 1 today? All the teams in the base are indeed the same. Team 1 is trained by me personally. We've been together for so many years and we have feelings for each other. How can a few glasses of wine bother you? I brought a group of people, but I'm afraid only one person has feelings for me. Get lost. As the protagonist who was welcomed back by the base, Nanheng took Xiao Su and a few other people almost on time, and the supporting actors, led by Han Jin, arrived at the appointed place early. Han Jin usually wore a black uniform in the base. Today he rarely came out, and he didn't come out for a task. He just wanted to show off, so he changed into a suit he bought from somewhere. He looked very handsome, but in this kind of place he looked like a lobby manager. The other members of the base also changed into various kinds of clothes today, including various popular styles or suits and shirts. The usually tough young men looked especially sexy today. More than a dozen drill masters followed Nanheng all the way to the resplendent hotel. This hotel was indeed not the property of the Li family, which could be seen from the exterior decoration. The elders of the Li family had also experienced many things. They knew too well that when they held some power in their hands, they couldn't show too much of their glory in the business circle, so most of them looked very simple and low-key. And the so-called resplendent hotel in this hotel really exuded a sense of wealth from the inside out. Even the floor was glittering gold. The walls were also golden. In the spacious private rooms of hundreds of square meters, even the wine glasses on the coffee table were golden. There was a rotating golden ball above his head. As soon as the switch was pressed, there was golden light in all directions, which was like the scene of a nightclub in a certain era in China. The members of the base just wanted to come out to drink and didn't pay much attention to the environment here. Only those who came in with Nanheng looked inside with complicated expressions and were speechless. If he had known that this place was so ostentatious, he wouldn't have come. Boss Li always hated this kind of place the most. Xiao Su was dumbfounded. This place is too, a drill master said, whatever as long as the wine is delicious. Anyway, no matter how ostentatious this place looks, with Boss Li here, it will always show a different temperament. Come on, let's drink. The group of people then staggered from side to side with laughter, because this act of flattering Boss Li was too obvious. A Feng, who came with him, was indeed a man sent by the Li family. He was very familiar with the affairs of the base and the various business occasions in the business circle outside. He skillfully arranged for the members of each team to go to several large private rooms, and then arranged for a few members who were good at singing to stand up and sing, while he took Han Jin to the reception desk to carry the wine. After all, there were a lot of people in the base and everyone was good at drinking. The staff in the hotel couldn't carry so many people, so they had to help carry the wine. The nearest private rooms were all occupied by the people of 11 base. To put it simply, they were all men. There were only 2 girls present, and they were the staff members sent by the hotel to serve and manage each private room. Perhaps these men were used to being vegetarian in the base. It was rare for them to see 2 beautiful girls, but none of them came up to flirt with them or ask for their phone numbers. They just drank and sang and didn't pay attention to the girls at all. Or it was because boss was present. No one dared to be too arrogant and presumptuous. Xiao Su turned back to call Feng Ling. You've been first in the assessment for 2 years in a row, but your physical fitness has never been recognized by boss, right? Come on, let's carry the wine. He had intentionally called Feng Ling out. Because Boss Lee also went out to help carry the wine, he wanted to ask Feng Ling to go with him. After all, there were so many people in the private room, and a group of young men crowded together to eat, drink, and sing. It was really messy. After Feng Ling came out, she looked at Xiao Su, who was dressed very casually, and heard Xiao Su ask her why she didn't drink with everyone just now. After all, Xiao Su was an old man in the base. He was about to leave the base, but in the past 2 years he had taken the initiative to let go of several opportunities and had been reluctant to leave. At least he could stay with the brothers in the base for a few more years while he was still young. In another 2 years he would probably be sent out again. And Xiao Su usually took good care of her. I find that you can do whatever you want with people, you know, but when you come to a place with a lot of people, you are very quiet. We are all men. If you are too quiet, you won't fit in with the group and it won't be good for you in the future. Xiao Su thought of the people in the base talking about Feng Ling behind her back today and wanted to remind her to pay attention to the interpersonal relationship with other members. Feng Ling smiled. It doesn't matter. Kay and the others can talk to me. As for the others, no one can be liked by everyone and I don't need everyone to like me. If you don't like me, you can see me in the training field. I don't want to have any unnecessary communication with people who talk behind my back because they can't beat me. Well, that kind of narrow-minded person was really not suitable for frequent contact. Chapter 775. Han Jin called the two of them from the reception desk. Hey, are you going to move the wine? There are so many boxes. Do you want boss to move them all by himself? Hearing Han Jin's roar, everyone saw that Nanhing had moved several boxes of wine into the private room. After going back and forth so many times, his face was not red and he was not out of breath. He even had a cigarette in his mouth, as if the box of wine in his hand that weighed 70 or 80 kilograms didn't have any effect on him. Seeing this scene, Feng Ling finally understood why Boss Lee was always displeased with her physical strength. She could probably compete with other people in the base in terms of physical strength, and she could even win several times in arm wrestling. But if she was in front of Boss Lee, she would probably be crushed into pieces. Xiao Su took Feng Ling over to help. After a while, the hotel staff came to find Nanhing to talk to, but Nanhing left in the blink of an eye, and Han Jin was also called over. After Xiao Su, Feng Ling and several other brothers moved all the wine on the reception desk, they went to the underground wine cellar of the hotel to get the red wine here. Kay was a little drunk after drinking a few glasses. He wanted to come out to get some fresh air, but seeing Feng Ling was doing physical work, he came over to help. Seeing that Kay's neck was red from drinking, but he still came over to help her, Feng Ling smiled warmly at him. Your alcohol tolerance is no different from 2 years ago. You always boast that you can drink well. How long has it been? Your neck is so red. TSK, didn't you tell me to drink more today? Just now I was forced to drink 2 bottles of beer by a few brothers. Some of them were beer and some were specially imported from China. Who can bear this kind of drinking? So what if I'm red? Anyway, I'm not drunk. Although she said that, Kay's neck was really red. If it weren't for the fact that Feng Ling knew that Kay's neck would turn red every time he drank, she would have thought that he had been poisoned. It was easy to get drunk when beer and white wine were mixed together. Feng Ling saw the box of red wine in her hand taken by Kay, glanced at his nose, and raised her hand to help him pull the corner of his neckline to the side. Just as he stretched out his hand, the elevator leading to the wine cellar in the basement opened. The 2 men stood in the well-lit elevator. When they looked up, they saw 2 people outside. One of them had a smile on his face, holding a large wooden box of red wine in his hands. The other was also smiling. He stretched out his slender white hand to touch the other party's neck and tugged at his collar. Kay and Feng Ling both turned to look at the people in the elevator, only to see Han Jin with a complicated expression and Li Nanheng expressionlessly. Han Jin first looked at Feng Ling with a reproachful look and then looked at Kay sympathetically with a, "Ha, you're finished. It's time to say goodbye to tomorrow's sun." Kay was usually very careless and rough. He was used to fooling around with Feng Ling, but he also knew that he had to restrain himself in front of Boss. He also knew that Boss seemed to have a special care for Feng Ling, but now he was a bit drunk and Feng Ling's white and soft little hand had just accidentally rubbed against his neck, so he didn't notice the signal in Han Jin's eyes and was still thinking about helping Feng Ling move the wine. At the moment he saw Boss Lee, he suddenly stood in front of Feng Ling as a protector. "Boss, Drill Master Han, have you finished talking about business? Go back to the private room to drink? You don't need to move the last box of red wine. It's definitely enough." Kay eagerly walked in with the wooden box in his arms and winked at Feng Ling, asking her to quickly follow him into the elevator. Feng Ling followed him in and stood next to Kay. There was not much space in the elevator. There were 4 people standing in the elevator, and one of them was holding a huge wooden box in his arms. Feng Ling stood very close to Kay, but she was slightly further away from Han Jin and Nan Heng. The gap between them was particularly obvious in comparison. Li Nanheng's expression became colder. He glanced at Kay and didn't look at Feng Ling. When the elevator stopped back to the first floor, he went straight to the private room. Han Jin could only chat with Kay with a smile. "Weren't you still in there just now? Why did you go to the wine cellar below?" "Kay, I couldn't find Feng Ling for a long time, so I asked around and found out that he was in the wine cellar below, so I came to help." "Help?" "Yes. Feng Ling can't even move such a box of wine. Do you have to protect this guy as if he is your girlfriend? Don't forget how Feng Ling kicked you to the ground during the competition on the training ground." Kay was really drunk just now, but now he suddenly sobered up. "Yes, Feng Ling is very strong. When he kicked me, he didn't use much strength. Why should I help him move this?" Han Jin smiled as if watching a good show. "Feng Ling, wait, was that boss just now?" Kay seemed to be completely sober at this moment. Suddenly remembering the look in Li Nanheng's eyes, he couldn't help shivering. "Otherwise, who do you think it was?" "Shit. I'm dead." When Kay hurriedly moved the box to the private room, Han Jin also took a meaningful look at her, and then left Feng Ling standing alone in the elevator, a little stunned. Xiao Su passed by from the other side with a few bottles of liquor. "Why are you in a daze? The elevator will go up soon. Which floor are you going to?" Feng Ling came back to herself and stepped out of the elevator. Back in the private room, Kay felt that he might be frozen to death by Boss's eyes, so he tried to make himself as invisible as possible. He hid in the corner behind the crowd and chatted with others, not even daring to show his head. After entering the private room, Feng Ling found a place to sit down. Because there was a long-range sniper training assessment tomorrow, she didn't intend to drink at all. After all, she didn't want to affect tomorrow's assessment. The people in the private room took turns to sing, and the volume was very loud. The sound of drums and electronic music came from the stereo, which was deafening and made people dizzy. There was only one thought in her mind. No matter who persuaded her to drink tonight, she would at most drink a few glasses of mineral water with them. She would never drink a sip of alcohol. At this moment, Han Jin and Xiao Su found that Nanheng was supposed to get Feng Ling to stay with him tonight, but Boss didn't even look at Feng Ling in the private room today. Chapter 776. Seeing that Boss didn't go to Feng Ling's side and Feng Ling had been staying in the corner drinking water, Kay crept past the crowd and came to Feng Ling's side. "Why do you drink so much water? Don't you want to drink a glass of wine?" With that, he poured a glass of wine for Feng Ling. "Don't worry about tomorrow's assessment. Anyway, Boss is here today. If the assessment is really affected because of everyone drinking, we can move it to the day after tomorrow. It doesn't matter. Don't be so reserved. Everyone is out to play and the protagonist is Boss. He won't make things difficult for us tomorrow." Kay lowered his head to pour wine for Feng Ling, and the two sat next to each other in the corner of the sofa. When Kay lowered his head, Feng Ling happened to turn her head to talk to him, and their faces were particularly close. And at this moment, Feng Ling instantly felt that someone's eyes seemed to be fixed on her. She looked forward, only to see Li Nanheng sitting in the high chair in the middle of the private room, and his eyes met hers in the air. Nanheng looked at the gentle and considerate Kay and then at Feng Ling, who sat there motionlessly, and his eyes became colder and colder, like a blade that could cut people. In the private room, everyone laughed, sang, roared, and played. Only Nanheng and Feng Ling briefly looked at each other for a few seconds. In the silence, there seemed to be a different kind of coldness. In just a few seconds, Kay stuffed a glass into Feng Ling's hand. She took a sip and found that it was wine. But Kay poured her the local wine in Los Angeles, which was not high in alcohol. She wouldn't get drunk even if she drank a whole bottle, let alone just a glass. In the following time, the more Feng Ling was silent and the more Kay took care of her, the worse Nanheng's mood became. On the other hand, everyone was completely out of it. They were making a lot of noise, playing finger-guessing games, changing private rooms to play board games, or singing or playing cards. All sorts of entertainment activities were being played. It was not that Feng Ling didn't care about these things, but she had never played these things before. In the past 2 years she had watched others play in the base and learned from them, but no matter what they played, she still couldn't beat them. Finally, they found some sense of victory in these entertainment events. Usually, the people who were thrown over their shoulders by her on the training ground seemed to be addicted to challenge her in various board games, but in the end, Feng Ling lost all of them. She really didn't know how to play. He wasn't interested at all. However, this group of people was extremely excited. She was clearly the loser, but they were so happy that they directly lifted her up and circled the room several times. Later, when they played cards, as long as anyone found out that they were in cahoots with Feng Ling, they would directly fold and admit defeat. Later on, everyone started to play the drinking card game. The rules were that in each round, everyone would draw a card from A to K. Each card had a different reward or punishment. For example, the person who drew 2 could drink a glass of wine, and the person who drew 3 would have to be a prostitute for the round. In this round, everyone who was punished to drink could ask the prostitute to sit on their thighs and feed them wine. What's more, when the prostitute fed wine, not only did she have to sit on their thighs and personally feed the wine to her mouth, she also had to say in a sweet voice, "Sir, drink well." Since the people present were all men, the ladies, dressed as women, had to wear tight black sequin dresses that could only be seen in nightclubs to sit on the laps of the old man and drink. This scene was exciting just thinking about it. The hotel also cooperated and really found the same tight dresses of different sizes within half an hour, from XXXL to M, and hung 4 or 5 dresses in the private room. Whoever was punished had to change into this kind of dress and then accept the punishment. Later, Li Nanheng drew the drinking card. The members of 11 Base were very sensible. No one dared to ask boss to wear this kind of dress to sit on their thighs, so they simply asked him to drink 3 glasses of wine as punishment. No one courting death asked boss to serve them. The only exception was boss. All the others who drew the drinking card were not spared in the end. But Boss Li was not too disappointed. When he was punished to drink 3 glasses of wine, he directly drank 6 glasses, doubling the punishment of not changing the dress. The wine he drank was very strong. Ordinary people would be drunk after 2 or 3 glasses, but Boss had a good capacity for liquor. He had no problem drinking 6 glasses, and he even punished himself, so everyone was convinced. When Feng Ling drew the drinking card, the group of men in the private room suddenly became excited. With a roar, when Feng Ling was about to say, "Why don't you drink a few glasses of wine to punish yourself?" Xiao Su had excitedly stepped forward and handed her the M-size tight dress that no one else could wear and directly stuffed it into her arms. "Put it on. Let everyone see. What kind of peerless beauty Feng Ling will look like in women's clothes. Will it make us all gay?" "That's right, Feng Ling." Feng Ling's eyes lit up. Yes, didn't someone say that Feng Ling is the team flower of Team 1 a while ago? Aha, put it on. F***CKU. K threw a peanut at their heads. Feng Ling is a real man. What the hell are you spending money for? I don't know whether he is a real man or not, but it is a fact that he is more beautiful than a woman. Oh, by the way, in addition to the dress, is there a wig in the hotel? Let Feng Ling put on the dress and then put on a wig, the kind with waist-length hair. Feng Ling didn't intend to wear this tight dress at all. She usually wore men's clothes to make these people fantasize. If she really put on this dress, wouldn't she be courting death? Hey, why did you throw the dress on the sofa? When we come out to play, we should have fun. Boss just punished himself by drinking 6 glasses of wine. That's Boss. Boss is still the protagonist today. But you can't. Just now, didn't the boys from other teams put on women's clothes and come out to drink? You have been the first in the assessment for the past 2 years. It's rare for you to come out and let us have some fun in the entertainment. Don't be a disappointment. Hurry up and change your clothes. The drill master of a team came over with a smile, picked up the dress again, and threw it into Feng Ling's arms. You're always shy. You don't take a shower with us and never change your clothes in front of us. We are all men. It's common for you to come out bare-chested, but you never do it. If you don't want to be seen, go out and turn left. There is a bathroom. After changing, come back. We don't mind waiting for you for a few minutes. Hurry up and change. At the thought of Feng Ling changing into women's clothes, I'm so F***king looking forward to it. Feng Ling held the dress in her hand and didn't speak anymore. She really couldn't be a disappointment on this occasion. She didn't drink much just now. If she continued to be silent, it really wouldn't be good. Kay at the back also joined in at this moment. If they ask you to change, just do it. Anyway, we are all 24K men. What are you afraid of? Let them see if you change. We are handsome young men in men's clothes and charming little demons in women's clothes. We are so handsome. Let's piss them off. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.